Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., or more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie Briganti. Born on November 3, 1931, to Michael and Angela Briganti, Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. The Brigantis disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch, and for this video, we'll be referring to him by that name. Growing up, Butch DeFeo faced many struggles. As the firstborn son, his father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute, he would hug his son, and the next, he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, as a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him, calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. Butch was not an only child for long. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise DeFeo, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory DeFeo. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie decided to express his love in a unique way. He co-wrote a song titled The Real Thing, which jazz legend Joe Williams recorded in 1963 for his album One Is a Lonesome Number. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew DeFeo. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael Briganti Sr. in the early 1970s. Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-size portraits to immortalize his family. Once again, Michael Briganti Sr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The portraits, painstakingly detailed, took over a year to complete. When finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to drugs and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times where he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even went so far as to suggest that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with 2 accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. Under the pressure, Theo confessed, saying, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work like nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist who disagreed, diagnosing Butch with antisocial personality disorder. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, Theo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. There remains a theory that a second killer was involved, but that person was never apprehended. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the Theo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. With the Amityville home marked by its horrific past, it's impossible not to wonder if the tragic events left behind some lingering, eerie energy, haunting the land where it all unfolded. But the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home, and they weren't the kind of stories you'd expect from a typical housewarming. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Now, don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. But what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman. But after settling in, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random. It was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy started talking about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife, Kathy, as she lay sleeping. But something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoof prints appeared in the snow right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red, and was only large enough for 2 people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint, rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually brave dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the only time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows. Something invisible to human eyes, but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house, as if an invisible group was holding a late-night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate. But the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet, something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden, intense sickness, and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force, seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author J. Anson, who would later write the Amityville Horror, recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story. It was real. Because it was corroboration, Anson later said, this was actually happening to someone. This was not The Exorcist or The Omen. From there, I started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. They didn't leave with the intention of never coming back. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. We didn't wake up that morning thinking we were leaving for good. This was our home. When we left, we didn't know we wouldn't be coming back. We didn't know that everything we left behind, we would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off, as noted in a Washington Post article from 1979. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer J. Anson, who would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller The Amityville Horror in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. But some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, and a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real-life struggles, the Amityville Horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time. The trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable as seen in The Shining. A priest reluctantly pulled into a supernatural battle reminiscent of The Exorcist. The grotesque imagery of excessive vomiting, also a signature of The Exorcist. Even the eerie, small-town coastal setting echoed the atmosphere of Jaws. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, author J. Anson quickly dismissed the idea. "Leave it?" "No," he replied. However, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and idiot lifestyle rather than anything paranormal. But while Anson shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had near-fatal or fatal encounters. One of Anson's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water. But when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite only being stored in a simple clasped envelope. And the most chilling case? A woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of the home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. And in 2005, the Amityville Horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin from the original 1979 film. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. One major addition? A babysitter character who never appeared in the book. In the 1979 film, She watches the kids while George and Kathy attend a wedding. In the 2005 remake, the couple is simply on a night out, but according to the book, the whole family actually went to the wedding together. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974. Meanwhile, the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also gets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. While the 2005 versions took the most creative liberties, the 1979 film also made key changes, sometimes stripping important moments of their original context. But regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains. An entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker Harbor Light, different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he held before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed his sister Dawn killed their father and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990, stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, and he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author Rick Osuna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, with inconsistent details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife, Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, if you're not a fan of paranormal activities, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath, driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. But if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. Case 2. On June 20th, 2003. That morning, at around 6:30 a.m. in Fukuoka, Japan, Shinjiro Matsumoto's father, Yoshido, arrived at his son's house like he did every day. But that day, something was off. He rang the doorbell a few times, but no one answered. Now, Yoshido lived really close to his son's house, and was super close to his 2 grandkids. He would visit every day to take them to school, and by this time, his daughter-in-law, Chika, would usually be up making breakfast for the family. But oddly, that day was a complete silence. That's when Yoshido's instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. Luckily, he had a spare key to his son's house, so he rushed back to his home to grab it. When he returned and opened the gate, he immediately noticed something strange. The Mercedes-Benz was missing from the driveway. Could the whole family have left earlier than usual? He thought to himself, but the eerie silence didn't sit well with him. Slowly, he made his way inside. As he stepped through the door, he was met with an unsettling calm. The front door was slightly ajar, but there was no one in sight. It was so quiet, it almost felt like the house was abandoned. Yoshido checked around the house, and that's when he saw it. The living room, the bathroom, and the bedrooms were all in chaos. Items were thrown around, like there had been a struggle. But the most disturbing part was the bathroom. It seemed mostly clean, but there were faint red stains. Bloodstains. Panicked, Yoshido quickly called his son's workplace, hoping to get some answers. However, the staff at the clothing store told him that Shinjiro hadn't shown up for work yet. That was it. Without wasting another moment, he called the police. And within no time, the Fukuoka City Police arrived at the Matsumoto home. At the entrance, they found odd, disjointed footprints, small bloodstains, and drag marks leading away from the front door. It seemed like someone had been struck down right there. There was blood on the floor, and despite efforts to clean up, the forensic team had no problem finding the traces. The children's bedroom also had signs of a struggle, though not many. What really made things chilling, though, was the bathroom. Blood was splattered everywhere on the walls between the tiles. It was clear that someone had tried to clean it up, but they didn't do a very good job. The amount of blood suggested that whoever was hurt there had been seriously injured. At this point, the police confirmed that all 4 members of the Matsumoto family were missing. The house had been ransacked and everything of value, cash, jewelry, even the Mercedes, was gone. The police's initial conclusion was that it was a robbery, but it quickly became clear that things had escalated to something much worse. Now, finding the Matsumoto family was the top priority, whether they were alive or dead. If this was a murder, they feared the bodies might have been disposed of. So the police decided to trace the missing Mercedes-Benz and start looking into Shinjiro Matsumoto's personal and social connections to find any leads that could help solve the mystery. That's how the investigators found out about Shinjiro Matsumoto's significant debt to loan sharks, which led to a theory that maybe the collectors had gone too far in their attempts to get the money back. The police also considered the possibility that in a moment of desperation, Shinjiro Matsumoto himself may have killed his entire family and then taken his own life. This idea seemed to make sense at first, but Matsumoto's father, Yoshido, was not convinced. He knew his son still had some savings, and more importantly, he and his wife owned 2 houses in Fukuoka, along with a house in the countryside. If Shinjiro had asked for help, Yoshido was certain he would have done everything in his power to assist him in repaying the debt. There was absolutely no reason for his son to resort to such extreme actions. Yoshido also pointed out that his son was not the type of person to give up on life. Shinjiro was known to be strong, optimistic, and deeply dedicated to his family. At just 41 years old, Yoshido believed it was unlikely that his son would take his own life. He was confident that the Matsumoto family had fallen victim to a criminal gang of loan sharks, and not that his son had turned violent. As these theories swirled, and many questions remained unanswered, something unexpected happened. Around 6 p.m. on the same day, the investigation team received a new report. 2 workers were operating a tower crane in Fukuoka Bay, where they were moving large container goods. As they went about their work, they noticed something unusual floating in the water. Curiosity got the best of them, so they used binoculars to get a better look, and what they saw shocked them. There appeared to be a body in the water. Immediately they called it in, and the Fukuoka police rushed to the scene to investigate. When they arrived and began their search, the discovery was even more horrifying than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just one body floating in the water, but 4. The authorities quickly began the identification process, and soon confirmed the worst. The bodies belonged to 4 members of the Matsumoto family. The scene was utterly heartbreaking. Among the victims was Matsumoto's youngest daughter, only 8 years old. Tragically, she had been strangled to death. Her face had a large, dark purple bruise, which suggested she had been struck with incredible force. The police believed that the person responsible for the violence must have been very strong. The bruise was so severe that they felt even an adult man would likely have been knocked unconscious by such a brutal blow. The 11-year-old son of the Matsumoto family also tragically died from asphyxiation. Bruises were found on his arms and legs, which indicated he had likely been stepped on. The police suspected that there was more than one perpetrator involved in the crime, one person holding the boy down while another used a rope to strangle him. It was a horrific scene, suggesting a coordinated attack. Shinjiro Matsumoto, the father, wasn't spared from the violence either. His body showed signs of multiple injuries, and his head had been struck with such force that it fractured his skull. However, despite these severe wounds, the blow to his head wasn't the direct cause of his death. According to the forensic report, Matsumoto had been beaten severely, with numerous fractures to his bones and significant internal bleeding. The medical examiners concluded that while he had been beaten, the cause of death was actually drowning. Matsumoto was still alive when he was bound and thrown into the sea, unable to escape the harsh fate that awaited him. Now, the deaths of Matsumoto and his children were tragic beyond words, but it was the discovery of the mother's body that left everyone in shock. 40-year-old Chika Matsumoto's body was found naked, covered in dark bruises, and there's no doubt that she had been assaulted before her life was brutally taken. Chika, once a beautiful and fit woman, was now unrecognizable. Her head had been struck with a blunt object, and the damage to her genital area was severe. What made the scene even more horrifying was the fact that large portions of her flesh, at least 30 patches, had been removed. Forensic experts confirmed that this had occurred while Chika was still alive. The thought of the pain she must have endured before her death was almost too much to comprehend. Experts even compared the killer's method of torture to the ancient Chinese practice of ling chi, or death by 1,000 cuts, which involved slow and agonizing torture. Chica's cause of death was also determined to be drowning, but it was unlikely she had drowned in seawater. Forensic analysis suggested that she might have been submerged in a bathtub before being thrown into the water. The brutality of the crime left everyone involved in the investigation stunned and outraged. The killer's methods were so barbaric that they could hardly be processed by the team working to bring justice for the Matsumoto family. It was at this point that they began to seriously consider Yoshido's theory, that the Matsumoto family had been targeted by loan sharks and other underworld figures as retaliation for unpaid debts. However, as they dug deeper, they realized there were a few holes in this theory that didn't quite add up. First off, the underworld typically values money above all else. They don't kill a debtor until they've collected the debt. Matsumoto owed a sum of 10 million yen, which was a large amount, but certainly not impossible to repay. If he couldn't manage it, his father, Yoshido, had enough savings to help. In fact, Yoshido would have done everything in his power to help his son pay back the debt. If the underworld was involved, it didn't make sense to them that the entire family would be killed. Typically, they would target the person who owed the money, not their children or wife. This raised suspicions that something else might be at play. Another issue was with the codes of the Japanese underworld. These codes were strict and usually prohibited the killing of a debtor's family. Matsumoto had borrowed from a group with traditional values, where punishments for unpaid debts usually included extreme measures like limb amputation, but never murder. There had never been a case of an entire family being killed over a debt before. This made the investigators question whether the underworld was truly involved. What's even more convincing was the fact that the loan sharks even took the unusual step of approaching the police, repeatedly insisting that they had no involvement in the crime. Their reasoning was that killing the entire Matsumoto family would leave no one left to pay the 10 million yen. From a financial standpoint, this argument made sense. The police started to see that there might be a different motive behind the killings. And as the investigation team discussed the case, they started to find some critical clues that pushed the theory in a new direction. The police discovered that all the victims, the Matsumoto family, had been handcuffed and weighed down with objects. This was a method used to make sure the bodies would sink when thrown into the sea. But there was a mistake in the binding technique. Some of the weights came loose, causing the bodies to resurface. That small error provided the investigators with a valuable lead. Upon further examination, the police realized that the handcuffs and weights were actually sex toys, which was a shocking twist. Fukuoka wasn't a large city, and there weren't many shops that sold such items. This made it easier for the police to track down where they came from. But that was only the beginning. The investigators also found DNA from semen inside Chica's genital area, most likely belonging to the perpetrator. They also discovered skin flakes under her fingernails, suggesting that she had fought back with great strength. The skin fragments were from 3 different individuals, which immediately pointed to multiple attackers. Then came another key discovery: several fingerprints that didn't belong to anyone in the Matsumoto family. The police found 7 or 8 different fingerprints throughout the house, and after ruling out friends, colleagues, and family members, they realized that 3 of the prints didn't match anyone they knew. These prints were scattered around the house, suggesting that they belonged to the killers. The police quickly traced the sale of the handcuffs and weights to a small shop just over a kilometer from Matsumoto's house. The shop owner, Mr. A, remembered a customer who had purchased these items the day before. He recalled that the man seemed young, around 20 years old, and appeared to be a foreigner. This was unusual because people who typically buy these items are usually middle-aged men buying them for their wives. The man's Japanese wasn't very fluent, with many mispronunciations, leading Mr. A to believe that the customer could have been Korean or Chinese. However, despite the unusual nature of the purchase, Mr. A described the man as gentle and not someone who looked like a killer. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Now, thanks to the small shop surveillance cameras, the police were able to obtain footage of the suspect. This footage was quickly broadcast on television, hoping that the public might recognize the man and provide further leads. Shortly after the information spread, the Fukuoka police received an unexpected call. A student contacted them and revealed that he recognized the suspect. According to the caller, the suspect's name was Wang Liang, a student at a renowned language school for international students in Fukuoka. What stood out to the police was that Wang's Japanese was poor, which instantly reminded them of something the shop owner, Mr. A, had mentioned. Mr. A had stated that the person who bought the handcuffs and weights spoke very little Japanese and was likely a foreigner. This connection seemed too coincidental to ignore, and it made Wang Liang a prime suspect in the eyes of the police. They immediately began investigating his background, and guess what? They discovered that Wang Liang was only 19 years old and originally came from Chongqing, Jilin Province, China. His family was relatively well off and worked in construction, having spent hundreds of thousands of yuan, around $26,000, sending their son to study in Japan. However, things didn't go well for Wang Liang once he arrived in Japan. His academic performance at the language school was poor, and he was often absent from class. Back in China, he had already been known as a delinquent, associating with bad company. Without his family's supervision in Japan, his behavior became even worse. He began to stand out among the Chinese students, but not for the right reasons. He had multiple altercations with his classmates, resulting in warnings from the school and even threats of expulsion. By May of 2003, Wang Liang got into another fight, which led to his expulsion from the language school. This expulsion also meant that his international student visa was invalidated, and according to Japanese law, he could no longer remain in Japan under the student visa. At the end of 2002, Wang Liang returned to China, falsely telling his family that he was continuing his studies at another language school. His family gave him approximately 190,000 yuan, about $26,000, hoping to support his education. However, Wang's time back in China didn't last long. He returned to Japan on June 10th of 2003, but without any intention of enrolling in a school or following through with a plan for his future. Instead of staying in the school dormitory, he moved into an apartment with his roommate, Yang Ning, fearing that staying on campus would draw attention and expose his lack of enrollment. Once the police had gathered all this information, they decided to send a team to Yang Ning's apartment to investigate further. But when they arrived, they found that both Wang Liang and Yang Ning had recently moved out. Suspecting that something wasn't right, the police quickly checked the immigration records. Their findings were chilling. Just 2 days after the tragic incident on June 20th, Wang Liang and Yang Ning had boarded a flight back to China, which only raised more suspicions and confirmed their worst fears. It appeared that the suspect was trying to flee the country after committing the heinous crime. Because why would Yang Ning leave everything behind, especially when he hadn't been expelled from the language school like his friend? It became clear to the investigation team that there was more to this story. Earlier on, they had suspected that more than one person had been involved in the murders, and now it seemed that Yang Ning might be just as guilty as Wang Liang. So, the police started digging deeper into Yang Ning's background to see if they could find something that linked him to the crime. What they discovered was shocking. Yang Ning, just 20 years old, came from a completely different background than Wang Liang. He was also from Chongqing, Jilin, but his family was well off. His father worked as a mid-level city official. Unlike Wang Liang, who often skipped school and wandered the streets of Japan, Yang Ning was focused and responsible, working at a burger restaurant to support himself. The two young men had known each other since they were kids in China, but their relationship grew even closer once they both found themselves in Japan. At first, Yang Ning seemed like a decent person, but the more time he spent with Wang Liang, the more he began to change. Wang Liang was a troublemaker, gambling, drinking, and visiting shady places like red light districts and bars run by the Chinese underworld. He would buy sex toys and engage in illegal activities, and soon enough, Yang Ning was caught up in the same dangerous lifestyle. Yang Ning went from being a hardworking, responsible young man to someone who indulged in alcohol, gambling, and even bullying other students with Wang Liang. Despite their growing reputation as troublemakers, many of their classmates couldn't believe that the two could be capable of something as horrific as murder. But the police knew better. They understood that murderers often had a dual personality, appearing harmless and kind one moment, then capable of unspeakable violence the next. With this in mind, the investigators refused to rule out the possibility that both of them were involved in the brutal deaths. And at Yang Ning's former rental apartment, the Fukuoka police uncovered a chilling collection of evidence. They found numerous hair samples and fingerprints on various items around the apartment. After thorough analysis and comparison, they made a stunning discovery. The DNA from the skin flakes under Chica's nails matched both Wang Liang and Yang Ning. But that wasn't all. The fingerprints from the apartment also matched those found at the Matsumoto crime scene. It was becoming undeniable. Wang Liang and Yang Ning were the murderers. While the Japanese police sought help from Chinese authorities to track down Wang Liang and Yang Ning, who had fled back to their hometowns in China, they kept pressing on. There was still one key question. Who was the third person involved in the crime? DNA from 3 individuals had been found under Chica's nails, and different fingerprints were discovered at the crime scene, meaning there had to be another accomplice. The investigation team quickly turned their attention to anyone closely connected to Wang Liang and Yang Ning, and it didn't take long to identify a new suspect. Wei Wei, another international student from Hunan province in China. Wei Wei, 24 years old, was much older than the other two. He came from a wealthy family with his parents owning a factory and being well-known entrepreneurs back home. Though his academic performance was average, Wei Wei took his studies seriously. After completing his mandatory military service, his family arranged for him to study abroad in Japan in 2001. As mentioned, Wei Wei was known for his dedication to his studies. He rarely skipped classes or left early unless there was a legitimate reason. However, in the months leading up to the crime, his behavior began to change. He started missing several days of school at a time, offering excuses such as illness, part-time work, or poor mental health. According to some Chinese international students, Wei Wei had suddenly become close friends with Wang Liang and Yang Ning about 6 months before the incident. This new friendship, however, wasn't just about casual bonding. Wei Wei, who had trained in martial arts during his time in the military and won several provincial competitions, started teaching Wang Liang how to fight. Wang Liang had a reputation for getting into fights, but he wasn't always successful, so it made sense that he would seek training from someone skilled in combat. The trio often spent time at bars owned by the Chinese underworld, indulging in drinking and partying. But things had changed for Wei Wei. His once wealthy family faced financial instability, and he couldn't handle the loss of his comfortable life. This shift left him bitter and resentful, which led him deeper into destructive behaviors, drinking to numb his feelings and associating with increasingly bad influences. In fact, in March 2003, Wei Wei and another Chinese national had been involved in a robbery. They stole 260,000 yen from 2 students leaving an internet cafe. The victims knew Wei Wei but didn't report the crime, fearing retaliation. Then, just before the tragic events in June, a female international student came forward, accusing Wei Wei of brutally beating her over a trivial matter. The police were now convinced that Wei Wei was likely an accomplice in the Matsumoto murders. Fukuoka police acted quickly, conducting an emergency investigation. They discovered something critical. Wei Wei had no exit records from Japan, meaning he was still in the country. To catch Wei Wei, the Japanese government swiftly issued an exit ban and launched an extensive manhunt. However, Wei Wei was one step ahead. He abandoned his residence and vanished without a trace. 2 months later, in August, a break in the case occurred. While shopping at an airport convenience store, Wei Wei got into a heated argument with the staff over a payment issue. This caught the attention of patrol officers who intervened to defuse the situation, sensing the officers' presence. Wei Wei panicked and bolted, prompting the police to signal for backup. Despite his training in martial arts, Wei Wei could not outrun the authorities. A thorough search of his belongings revealed a plane ticket scheduled for departure in just 1 hour, bound for Shanghai, China. Now Wei Wei proved to be a cunning individual. After his arrest, he refused to answer any questions, maintaining a stoic silence. Determined to connect him to the crime, the police extracted his DNA for comparison, and the results confirmed his involvement in the brutal murder of Chica's family. However, the case was far from closed. Wei Wei's silence about the whereabouts of Wang Liang and Yang Ning left investigators frustrated. Without their capture, identifying the mastermind behind the heinous crime remained a challenge. Japanese authorities pinned their hopes on China's law enforcement, anticipating swift action to apprehend the remaining suspects. Japanese media, however, were less optimistic. Many doubted the efficiency of Chinese law enforcement, predicting that the fugitives would adopt false identities and evade capture for years. Some even speculated that Wang Liang and Yang Ning might vanish into the shadows permanently. But surprisingly, just 2 months after fleeing to China, a breakthrough occurred. In Liaoyang, Liaoning province, a man reported suspicious behavior from a new coworker. The coworker, he claimed, was excessively lavish with money and often boastful. In fact, during a drunken rant, the man had confessed to committing a horrific crime, murdering an entire family of 4. Chinese police quickly detained the individual for questioning. At the station, the young man appeared visibly shaken, showing signs of severe anxiety. He collapsed at the sight of the officers and repeatedly asked about leniency policies for honest confessions. Under the promise of a lighter sentence for cooperation, the suspect admitted to being Wang Liang. Unlike Wei Wei, Wang willingly revealed the whereabouts of his accomplice, Yang Ning, leading to Yang's swift capture. With both accomplices in custody, Wei Wei finally began to confess to his crimes. Wei Wei started his story by explaining how he met Wang and Yang while trying to make a living in a foreign country. At first, he was a law-abiding student focused on his studies, but life had not been kind. As mentioned earlier, financial troubles plagued his family back home, and they constantly urged him to find work and send money. Meanwhile, Wang and Yang openly bragged about their small-scale thefts. They claimed to have stolen money and belongings from their doormats with ease, always avoiding detection. Wei Wei initially dismissed their stories, viewing them as reckless troublemakers. However, as his financial situation worsened, their words began to linger in his mind. He tried to stay focused, but when his family's pleas for help grew more desperate, he reluctantly accepted Wang and Yang's offer to help him out. One evening, Wang and Yang took Wei Wei to a fast food restaurant where Yang had once worked. They asked him to stay outside while they went inside. Moments later, they emerged with bags of stolen cash, Yen 300,000 in total. Smiling, they handed Wei Wei 700,000 yen, claiming it was his share. Wei Wei was torn between gratitude and guilt. The money seemed like an easy solution to his problems, but deep down, he knew it was wrong. What started as hesitation quickly turned into temptation. The thrill of how simple the crime seemed was irresistible. The very next night, Wang and Yang invited Wei Wei to join them for another theft. This time, they targeted a teacher's dormitory. Under their guidance, Wei Wei snuck inside and managed to steal 50,000 yen. Though the amount was small, the adrenaline rush and the success of the operation made Wei Wei feel invincible. Over the next 6 months, Wei Wei's behavior changed drastically. He went from being a serious student to someone consumed by greed and recklessness. He participated in scams, stole valuables from fellow students, and even resorted to physical violence when things didn't go his way. Despite being briefly detained for an assault, he was undeterred. The world of crime had taken hold of him. Then came the night that changed everything. Wang and Yang presented Wei Wei with a bold plan to rob wealthy locals, promising it would be their big break. They assured him that with the money they would steal, they could all live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Eager for the riches and blinded by ambition, Wei Wei agreed without hesitation. The group began scouting potential targets, searching for people who displayed signs of wealth, such as luxury cars and grand homes. They soon set their sights on Shinjiro Matsumoto, a man who drove a high-end Mercedes-Benz and lived in a spacious 2-story villa. For a week, they observed his routine, learning that he and his wife worked during the day while their children attended school. Matsumoto often returned home late, leaving his family vulnerable in the evenings. On the night of June 19, 2003, the trio put their plan into action. They armed themselves with tools, including handcuffs and daggers, before heading to Matsumoto's villa. Breaking in through a window, they found the 2 children asleep while Chika, Matsumoto's wife, was in another part of the house. What happened next spiraled out of control. Overcome by their emotions, the trio acted in ways that went far beyond their original plan. They restrained Chika and, fearing discovery, decided to ensure there would be no witnesses. Tragically, this led to a series of irreversible actions, leaving no one in the house unharmed. As the group searched the house for valuables, Matsumoto unexpectedly returned home. Hearing the sound of his car, they panicked and hid. When Matsumoto entered, they overpowered him and continued their search. However, their efforts yielded only 40,000 yen, a mere fraction of what they had anticipated. The amount, equivalent to about $250, was barely enough to cover basic expenses, let alone their dreams of living in luxury. To cover their tracks, Wei Wei, Wang Liang, and Yang Ning began erasing all evidence. They meticulously cleaned the scene, wiping away bloodstains and footprints. They then tied the bodies of the 4 members of the Matsumoto family to heavy weights, loaded them into the stolen Mercedes-Benz, and drove to the beach. There, under the cover of darkness, they disposed of the bodies in the water, hoping to leave no trace. However, the very next day, the Fukuoka police held a press conference, revealing details of the shocking case. The killers, watching the news unfold, felt a surge of panic. For the first time, they realized how deeply their crime had affected not just the victims, but the entire community. Unsure of what to do next, they began to discuss fleeing Japan and returning to their home country. But for Weiwei, the thought of going back was unbearable. The shame he felt was overwhelming. He felt like he had lost his way, and returning home seemed like an impossible option. He also believed misguidedly that as an accomplice, he would not face the death penalty if caught. So he made the decision to remain in Japan, thinking that perhaps the law would be lenient on him. In 2005, Yang Ming's fate was sealed. He was sentenced to death and executed almost immediately. Wang Liang, on the other hand, received a life sentence for his cooperation in helping the police capture Yang Ming. But Weiwei's story was far from over. During his trial, he claimed that he was merely helping his friends and had no intention of committing murder or robbery. He argued that he was swept up in the moment, following his friends without thinking of the consequences. His defense was unsuccessful, and he was sentenced to death as well. Despite his appeals, which he filed twice, the court rejected them, stating that his crimes were just as severe as those of the mastermind behind the killings. The brutal nature of the crimes had left no room for leniency. However, in Japan, death sentences don't lead to immediate executions. They require the justice minister's signature, and with only 1 or 2 orders signed each year, those on death row often have to wait years for their turn. Weiwei was no exception. Over 20 people were ahead of him in line for execution. For 16 long years, he sat in Fukuoka prison, haunted by his past and forced to reflect on his decisions. During this time, his mother and sister visited him regularly, but his father never came. Weiwei assumed his father was angry with him for the shame he had brought upon their family. The truth, however, was that his father had fallen seriously ill and could no longer travel to see him. As the years passed, Weiwei began to change. The anger and defiance he had once felt slowly gave way to remorse. He came to understand the full extent of his actions and how they had destroyed not only his own life, but the lives of the Matsumoto family and countless others. In a moment of clarity, Weiwei stated that if his death could bring any comfort to the victims' families, he was willing to accept it. He had lived with the weight of his actions for so long that, in the end, he felt no escape from the consequences. During his long wait for execution, Weiwei often reflected on his life, his choices, and the path that had led him to this point. What haunted him most was the thought that if he could turn back time, he would have made different choices. He regretted not working harder to understand Japanese and connect with others, a skill that might have allowed him to return home with pride instead of facing death. And in 2019, Weiwei was finally sentenced to death. While this may have brought some sense of justice, it's impossible to ignore the lingering pain of the surviving family members. Their loss is something that will never fade, a scar that will remain for the rest of their lives. Just like many others, this case has stayed with me, haunting my thoughts for weeks. The brutality, the senseless violence, it's hard to wrap my head around it. What do you think about this case? Do you believe the death penalty was the right sentence? Should Wang Liang have also received the death penalty instead of a life sentence? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment down below and let's discuss. Thank you once again for watching. Case 3. Born in 1946, Victor grew up in what seemed like a typical hardworking family. His parents, Robert and Stella Hoffman, were devout Lutherans living in the small village of Leask, Canada. The Hoffmans were known for their dedication to farming, their faith, and keeping Sundays sacred. They were the kind of family people would describe as ordinary and God-fearing. Victor was the 5th of 7 children in the Hoffman household. As a boy, he didn't stand out much from his siblings. His parents described him as a diligent, responsible child who hit all the usual milestones. By all accounts, he was a solid worker on the family farm and had a natural knack for hunting. He loved guns and spent a lot of time honing his skills as a hunter. However, there was one thing about Victor that set him apart. He was a loner. He didn't have friends and struggled in school, largely because he couldn't concentrate. Still, his parents didn't think much of it at the time. To them, Victor was just a quiet, independent kid. However, Victor later told psychiatrists that his struggles began when he was just 6 years old. That was the first time he saw the devil. He described the figure vividly, a towering black creature, 6 feet tall with a long tail. From that moment, he felt torn between two forces, God and Satan, each trying to claim him. The battle within Victor's mind was relentless. He often woke up in the middle of the night to strange tapping sounds that would grow louder and faster. By the time he turned 10, these experiences had grown darker. Victor began having violent impulses, urges to kill that consumed his thoughts daily. He fantasized about harming his family, and even strangers he had just met. But Victor kept his disturbing thoughts to himself, hiding them from his parents and siblings. To cope, he directed his violent tendencies toward animals. Killing animals gave him a sense of relief, even happiness, which he likened to the satisfaction a hunter feels after a successful kill. The devil, however, never left Victor alone. One morning while eating breakfast, he heard a voice calling out to him. Following the voice outside, he claimed to have encountered Satan again, this time in an even more grotesque form. A 6'6" man weighing over 300 pounds with the face of a pig. The devil promised Victor wealth and power in exchange for his soul. Though Victor claimed he didn't want to make a deal, he admitted to kneeling on one knee, hoping to at least become half as rich. But nothing came of it. Now, these encounters with the devil only deepened his already fragile mental state. He also claimed to see cold, dismembered hands floating in his room, and worse, he could feel them touch him. The devil's visits became a regular occurrence, with the dark figure relentlessly approaching Victor, asking for his soul. But no matter how many times the devil came, Victor refused to give in. Not long after these visits started, Victor allegedly began seeing angels. Unlike the devil, these angels appeared less frequently. According to Victor, they looked like human women, dressed elegantly, and their main goal was to guide him away from the devil's grasp. Victor believed they were messengers of God, sent to protect him and keep him on the right path. One day, Victor claimed he received a divine message. The angels and God themselves had tasked him with an extraordinary mission. If he could capture and destroy the devil, they promised to take him to heaven. This message consumed Victor. It gave him a sense of purpose, though it only made his behavior more erratic. Determined to fulfill this divine task, Victor tried everything he could think of to trap the devil. He started with nets, but those plans didn't work. Frustrated, he came up with a new plan. He'd shoot the devil down. On May 27, 1966, Victor's mother, Stella, found him outside in their backyard, firing his rifle into the sky. By the time she got there, he had already fired 3 rounds. Confused and understandably scared, Stella demanded to know what he was doing. His answer was chilling yet simple. "I shot the devil." Stella begged him to stop and managed to coax him back inside the house. Victor reluctantly put the rifle down, but then grabbed the family car and drove off. While he was gone, Stella and the rest of the family scrambled to hide every gun in the house. When Victor returned, he asked for the guns back, promising no harm would come to anyone, but his family refused. Agitated, he left again, only to come back shortly after, this time asking to speak with their pastor. The pastor arrived, and the two had a private conversation. Stella couldn't hear much of what was said, but when they stepped outside to finish their talk, she heard Victor say something that shook her to her core. "I'd like to kill my mom." That was it. Stella and her husband, Robert, knew they couldn't wait any longer. The next day, they made arrangements to have Victor admitted to Saskatchewan Hospital. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Back in 1967, Saskatchewan Hospital was a big mental health facility located in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, Canada. At that time, mental health care wasn't as advanced as it is now. Hospitals like Saskatchewan were more like institutions, where patients were often locked away and given basic care. The focus wasn't really on helping people get better or recover. Patients were more or less kept in check. Treatments were mainly about managing symptoms with medication, and there wasn't much emphasis on understanding or treating the root causes of their conditions. Now, when Victor underwent his initial psychiatric evaluation, the attending doctor officially diagnosed him with schizophrenia. The severity of his condition left no room for debate. Victor needed to be hospitalized. Surprisingly, he didn't resist. He voluntarily agreed to commit himself, perhaps believing it was the best option for everyone, including himself. According to the records, he wasn't just battling a serious mental illness. His body was also showing signs of stress. He'd often be found talking to himself, laughing at nothing, and deep in confusion about his own identity. At one point, he even questioned whether he was a boy or a girl, adding to the chaos in his mind. He was cooperative with the doctors during his exams, but came across as withdrawn, vague, and indifferent. It seemed like Victor felt like an outsider in his own family, as they just couldn't understand what he was going through. He mentioned to his siblings that he saw the devil, but they just mocked him, laughing off his concerns. Victor wasn't just imagining things, though. He believed the devil was punishing him because he refused to sell his soul. At one point, he even thought that someone else's brain was inside his body. He claimed the brain belonged to a girl named Denise, and she wanted to take full control of him. His doctors explained all of this as mere illusions, but Victor was convinced otherwise. He felt like he had touched both the devil and angels, so he wasn't ready to let go of his beliefs. But as time went on, Victor realized that if he kept insisting that he was seeing the devil, he'd never get out of the hospital. So he tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. He wanted to get better, to live a life without fear, and to leave the constant anxiety behind. The doctors started him on a treatment plan that included electroconvulsive therapy, 12 sessions in total, tranquilizers, occupational therapy, and supportive psychotherapy. By the end of his treatment, doctors believed that Victor had come to terms with the idea that all the devil sightings were just figments of his imagination. Victor seemed to buy into this too, as he no longer feared the devil, and his mind appeared clearer than ever before. He was happy and cooperative, though still somewhat withdrawn and inclined to be alone at times. But here's the catch. Even though Victor was no longer scared of the devil, his darker impulses didn't go away. He still had violent thoughts, imagining killing his family and people around him for no reason other than the simple desire to do so. He openly shared these impulses with his doctors, and they were aware of them. Despite this, they were optimistic about his recovery. They told his father that he would be fine in a year or two, with some more therapy. So despite knowing about Victor's dangerous impulses, the doctors discharged him from the hospital on July 26, 1967. They sent him back home to his father, along with a prescription for tranquilizers, hoping that this would keep him calm and prevent any further dangerous behavior. But life at home didn't exactly go as planned. Victor had a tough time adjusting back to life on the farm. He was surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of home, but something felt wrong. His mind was still clouded, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the world wasn't the same as it had been before his hospitalization. The medication prescribed to him didn't help much either. In fact, it made things worse. The tranquilizers made him feel incredibly sleepy, which interfered with his work on the farm. On top of that, his back hurt constantly, adding to his growing frustration. By August 8, Victor had had enough of the medication. He complained that the tranquilizers made him feel weak and useless, and he desperately wanted to get back to his normal routine. He needed to feel strong again, especially to be able to help on the farm. So he made a choice. He stopped taking the pills. At first, he didn't notice any drastic changes, but a few days later, something shifted within him. On August 11th, Victor woke up with an unsettling feeling. It wasn't like the usual emotions he felt on a bad day. This was different. He had a strong sense that something was about to happen, but he couldn't explain why. All he knew was that he felt like he would either end up back in the hospital or in jail. Victor's biggest fear was going back to the hospital. The idea of being locked away again terrified him, and he said he'd rather die than face that fate. In his mind, he had been suffering for so long, and the hospital was just a place where people didn't understand him. He believed that the worst part wasn't the treatments or the isolation. It was being trapped in a place where no one could see what was really going on inside his mind. Victor had always felt different, and he began to believe that he had a special ability. He called it visions. These weren't just regular dreams or daydreams, though. According to Victor, these visions were a way of seeing the future. He believed that these premonitions had been happening for as long as he could remember, and they would come to him every day. And with each vision, there was always the same unsettling feeling. After seeing the future, he would imagine killing someone. It was as if this act would somehow prove to the devil that he was finally on his side, that he wasn't afraid to do whatever it took. On August 14th, Victor's day started off pretty normally. He spent the day working on the tractor, trying to keep himself busy and occupied. But by 9:30 p.m., he was exhausted. He fell asleep on the sofa, but around 11:30 p.m., his parents woke him up and asked him to go to his bedroom. He went back to sleep but woke up again around 3 a.m., unable to rest any longer. It was then that he decided to go to the garage and try to distract himself with some work. But after working for a while, he still couldn't shake the feeling of restlessness. So he began pacing back and forth in the garage, letting his mind wander. That's when something strange happened. As Victor stood by the garage door, he suddenly felt a strange sensation in the side of his head. It wasn't painful, more like a sudden rush of pleasure. He described it as if his body had been sliced in half and something had left him. It wasn't a feeling of pain, but more like release. It was as if all the tension and fear he had been holding on to suddenly vanished. But in its place, the urge to kill grew even stronger. The feeling surged through him, taking over his mind. With this new overwhelming urge to kill, Victor decided he needed to do something about it. He grabbed his .22 Browning pump-action repeater rifle and loaded it up. He wasn't thinking clearly, but all he knew was that he needed to act. His plan was simple. He would drive around for about an hour, look for small rodents to hunt, and then head back home to finish his chores. He was looking for squirrels, particularly those living in the spruce trees around his farm. But as he drove for what felt like an eternity, he found no squirrels. No small animals at all. Victor could have taken that as a sign to turn around, but something inside him kept him going. The thought of killing wouldn't leave him. He couldn't ignore the pull to find something, someone, to take his frustration out on. He kept driving, passing house after house. It wasn't until around 6 a.m., when the sky was starting to brighten, that he came across a simple farmhouse. It didn't look any different from the dozens of other houses he had passed along the way, but for some reason, the feeling inside him became stronger. It was as if this place was calling to him. Unfortunately, the farmhouse where Victor ended up was home to the Peterson family, who lived in Shell Lake, about 40 miles away from Victor's place in West. Unlike Victor's troubled life, the Peterson household was filled with joy and laughter. They were a big, close-knit family with 10 members in total. At the heart of the family was James Peterson, a hard-working, humble man who was all about community. After serving in World War II, James bought 328 acres of land and became a mixed grain and cattle farmer. But life wasn't easy, and when his father retired, James took on an additional 72 acres, making his workload even heavier. Back then in Canada, it wasn't uncommon for families to be large, and the Petersons were no different. They had 9 kids, ranging from the oldest, Kathy, who was 19, down to the youngest, Larry, who was just 1. The rest of the children were Jean, 17, Mary, 13, Dorothy, 11, Pearl, 9, Phyllis, 4, William, 5, and Colin, 2. The Peterson kids were known as well-behaved, polite, and liked by everyone around them. The whole family had a reputation for being good, respectable folks. They were an ordinary, church-going family, and honestly, no one had anything bad to say about them. Kathy was the only one who wasn't living at home at the time. She had recently gotten married and moved to British Columbia with her husband. The rest of the Petersons lived together in a modest, cozy farmhouse with just 4 rooms. Out of those, only 2 were used as bedrooms. The kids all slept together in one room, except for the 1-year-old baby, who shared a bed with James and Evelyn. It was crowded, but they made it work. They weren't rich by any means, but the Petersons never complained. They cherished what they had, especially their family. James and Evelyn were totally focused on their kids and built a home around them. They loved their children above all else and wanted the best for them. Their oldest daughter, Jean, was an up-and-coming athlete, and her parents were determined to support her talent. So to help pay for a track camp she wanted to attend in Dundon, James decided to call up his neighbor, Drew Lang. He needed help hauling 50 bushels of hay to the grain elevator to sell the next morning, on August 15, 1967. The very same day that Victor, at that moment, was feeling the uncontrollable urge to kill. According to interviews from his trial, the voices in Victor's head were loud and clear, telling him, "This is it. This is where you have to go and do it." Now, to his surprise, he allegedly recognized the kitchen, despite never having been there before or even knowing the Petersons. It felt so familiar, like he'd seen it in a dream before. Not long after entering, he was confronted by James Peterson, who, not knowing who Victor was or why he was there, lunged toward him, trying to protect his family. James fought back, but Victor was too fast. He shot James 7 times as he tried to shield his loved ones. Afterward, Victor went back outside to reload his gun and gather his thoughts. But as he stood there, he saw Evelyn, James's wife, climbing out of a window with their youngest son, Larry, in her arms. Without hesitation, he shot Evelyn and left her where she fell, motionless. Victor didn't stop there. He went back inside the house, where the Peterson children were still asleep in their beds. One by one, he shot and killed 6 of them: Jean, Mary, Dorothy, Pearl, William, and Colin, at close range while they lay defenseless. The children had no chance. He then returned to where Evelyn's lifeless body lay, and took Larry's life as well. He later claimed it was a mercy killing, reasoning that the young boy was too little to survive alone. Victor's twisted reasoning didn't stop there. Since he'd already killed James, he felt there was no reason to leave anyone alive to identify him. So he set about collecting as many spent cartridge cases as he could find, making sure there was nothing left behind that could tie him to the scene. After the horrific act, Victor made his way back to his own parents' house. He arrived around 7:30 in the morning, but instead of feeling any sense of relief, he was overcome with sickness and horror at what he had just done. The guilt weighed on him heavily as he spent the rest of the day wrestling with the reality of his actions. Meanwhile, Drew Lang arrived at the Peterson farm, expecting to see James, but James was nowhere to be found. It was getting close to 9 a.m., so Lang, assuming James had slept in, joked to the house, calling out for him. But when he pushed open the door, his casual tone quickly turned into one of shock. Inside, he found James Peterson's lifeless body sprawled on the kitchen floor. Horrified, Lang quickly backed away and rushed to his car. He drove to the nearest phone, a good 4 miles down the road, to make the call that would change everything. The peaceful morning in Shell Lake was shattered, and the Peterson family's lives, along with everyone in the surrounding area, would never be the same. When the police arrived at the Peterson farmhouse, they wasted no time. They rushed in, scanning the home for any survivors and clues that could help them understand what had happened. But the scene they found was chilling. There were no signs of a robbery, and everything appeared untouched. It seemed like there was no clear motive for the murders. Inside, they found 28 bullets, with 27 of them having hit their targets. It was clear that the killings were deliberate, not random. Boot prints were also discovered on the kitchen's linoleum floor, but oddly, no boots from the Peterson home matched the prints. Alongside that, 5 cartridge casings were found, confirming that a .22 caliber weapon had been used. Then, just as they were starting their investigation, something eerie happened. A muffled noise broke the silence. They traced the sound to one of the beds, where, hidden under the sheets and wedged between the bodies of her sisters, they found 4-year-old Phyllis. She was the only survivor of the horrifying massacre. At first, she didn't fully understand what had happened, but she could sense the severity of the situation. Later, she recalled how the officer who carried her from the house was crying. That was when she knew something truly terrible had taken place. Phyllis's survival was a miracle, and her story would haunt everyone who heard it. The massacre of the Peterson family became one of the most gruesome crime scenes many officers had ever witnessed. Phyllis was taken to her uncle's house nearby, while Kathy, her older sister, was notified of the tragedy. Devastated, Kathy moved back to Shell Lake to care for her surviving sister. As the police investigated, they combed through the tall grass and fields surrounding the farm, hoping to find something, anything, that might give them a lead. Roadblocks were set up, and the search for the killer expanded across the area, growing larger with each passing day. They spent days searching, with dogs and a search party of 250 people scouring the land, but nothing turned up. Then, on the 4th day, they caught a break. A local resident from Leask, concerned about the tragedy, walked into the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment office in Shellbrook. The resident suggested they look into a young man, the son of his neighbor, who had recently been discharged from a mental hospital. The man had a known obsession with guns and hunting, which immediately raised red flags. The corporal and his team didn't hesitate. They quickly got in their cars and drove down the narrow, winding highways toward Leask, where they were found by the Hoffman family. They had a hunch this might be the lead they were desperately looking for. They started by questioning Victor's parents, focusing specifically on any firearms, boots, and of course their son. As the investigation went on, things started to add up. A rifle was found at the Peterson house. During the search, the detectives also spotted a pair of rubber boots. These boots were sent for comparison, too, and when the results came back, it was clear. Both the rifle and the boots matched evidence found at the Peterson house. It wasn't long before they had enough evidence to make an arrest. Victor Hoffman was charged with the crime as a single average-build man. He didn't seem afraid at all. In fact, he was eerily calm and surrendered without any resistance. His arrest happened just 3 hours after the funeral for the Pedersens, adding a whole new layer of shock and horror to the case. Things were disturbing. Victor confessed to everything. He admitted that the devil made him kill the Pedersens, but perhaps the most unsettling part of his confession came when he was asked about Phyllis, the only survivor. Victor claimed that he spared Phyllis because she had the face of an angel. As for the others, he said he didn't respect them, so instead of being sent to a regular prison, he was taken to a nearby mental hospital for further evaluation. There, doctors diagnosed him once again with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition that had clearly gone untreated. Despite this, the court found that he was still fit to stand trial. The defense team argued that Victor wouldn't have committed the horrific crime if it hadn't been for his untreated mental illness. They stood firm, insisting that his condition played a central role in the tragedy. After deliberating for 3.5 hours, the jury reached a verdict. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Victor, the jury's decision was based on something that many hadn't expected at the time: Victor's mental health. The doctor who had testified for the defense had given such a detailed and logical explanation of Victor's mental illness that the jury felt convinced. They understood that Victor was driven by something that, in his mind, felt real. His paranoia and delusions had played a major role in what happened, and that convinced the jury that he truly believed he was doing what he thought was necessary. Although Victor wouldn't spend the rest of his life in prison, the judge made sure he didn't get off easy. Instead of a typical prison sentence, Victor was committed to an institution for the criminally insane. This seemed to hurt him even more. After hearing the verdict, he just sat there, looking straight ahead, showing absolutely no emotion. It was as if the reality of his situation hadn't hit him yet. Victor was sent to a facility in southern Ontario, where he would stay confined in that institution, out of the public eye until December of 2001, when he was granted supervised access to nearby towns. But even this small amount of freedom didn't last long. Victor would never experience true freedom again. On May 21, 2004, Victor died in custody from cancer, but the aftermath of his crimes would linger for much longer. Kathy, the sister of one of the victims, took on the responsibility of raising Phyllis, the only survivor of the massacre. She raised Phyllis alongside her own children, giving her a second chance at life after the horrors she had experienced. Eventually, Kathy and her husband retired from farming and moved to a nearby town after their family farmhouse burned down. But despite the years that had passed, both Kathy and Phyllis couldn't shake their frustrations about what happened. Phyllis had been a little girl before. People looked at her differently, and it was hard to escape the weight of the past. In an interview in 2004, Phyllis opened up about her struggles. She said, "It was always hard to adjust, always feeling like I didn't fit in, until I had my son. And I kind of had to come back after Phyllis had been a little girl for a few years. She realized Canada's most horrific random killings, second only to the Porto-Peak massacre in 2020, where 22 innocent lives were taken. While the insanity ruling in Victor's case is something we can't ignore, it's definitely a tough one to digest. Just because someone is deemed insane doesn't mean their actions can be justified. No innocent life should ever be lost, no matter the circumstances. But let's be real. None of this would have happened if Victor hadn't been released from the mental hospital in the first place. Case 4. They lived here in the townhouse, where late Wednesday night police found 6 people dead, including 35-year-old Darshani Delampika Akanayak and her 4 young children. Danushka Wickramasinghe lived in the Ottawa suburb of Barhaven. He was employed at a mobile company in Sri Lanka, but he left there and arrived in Canada in July 2021 to pursue a higher education, and had recently established a cleaning company. He had spent several lonely years in Canada working to establish himself before reuniting last summer with his wife, Darshani Akanayak. At the time of the reunion, they had 3 young children together. Inuka and Ashwini attended Monsignor Paul Baxter School on Beatrice Drive, a 5-minute walk from the house. The youngest daughter, Kelly, was born in Ottawa, Canada, where the family lived. It was a typical family where the man of the house leaves his home and travels to another country for brighter and bigger opportunities, hoping to establish himself and get a house before his family reunites with him in their new neighborhood. All Danushka wanted was to be a provider for his loving, young family, but life had other plans for him. Last summer came the happy reunion with his wife, Darshani Akanayak, who was a teacher, and their 3 children. Months later, they had a baby girl named Kelly, and the arrival of the newborn brought so much joy to the family. That city's worst ever mass killing. 5 members of one family and an acquaintance all died Wednesday night. Danushka Wickramasinghe, he thought his days of living alone in Ottawa were behind him. But on one Wednesday, a horrible nightmare began to develop at the other side of Wickramasinga's front door. Canada became the place where a terrifying tragedy would occur on March 6, 2024. This was the day when the peace and quiet of a neighborhood house was disturbed by an act of violence that left everyone in total shock. The Wickramasinga home is one that was once filled with the innocent laughter of children, but this night, it was replaced with a creepy and deadly silence that expressed the depth of the loss. This has been a case that has shaken not just Ottawa, but the entire nation of Canada. It is a day everyone in the region has marked as the day of the horrifying killing of the Wickramasinga family. While Danushka Wickramasinga sustained serious injuries, his wife, Darshani Delanthika Akanayak, who was 35 years old, Inuka Wickramasinga, his 7-year-old son, his first daughter Ashwini Wickramasinga, who was 4 years old, 2-year-old Ranaya Wickramasinga, his second daughter, the family's infant Kelly Wickramasinga, who was just 2.5 months in Gamini American Mudiansalag, 40 years old family friend, were brutally murdered. The investigators involved in the case said Danushka was found outside the house yelling for help and was taken to the hospital where he was reported to be in a serious but stable condition. The police reported that the bodies of his wife, her children, and an acquaintance were then found inside the home. The sixth individual, who was found dead, was 40-year-old Gamini American Mudiansalag. According to the police, he was an acquaintance of the family who recently arrived in Canada and had been living at the Wickramasinga home. Darshani Delanthika Akanayak, 35, was formerly a student at Malaya Deva Balika Vidyalaya and an alumna of Colombo University. She was employed at St. Benedict Model School in Palgahuela. She was among the 6 people fatally attacked in a suburban townhome in the Ottawa community of Barhaven on Wednesday night in what police described as the worst mass killing in the city's history. Her 4 children, including an infant, were also killed, as was an adult acquaintance of the family who was living with them. Darshani's husband, 38-year-old Danushka Wickramasinga, was wounded but survived. Jayantha Akanayak, her mother, aged 66, stated that she sensed something was off the last time she spoke to her daughter, Darshani, on Wednesday night, the 6th of March. The two phoned each other every evening. Darshani, in her home in Ottawa, her mother in Palgahuela, located 2 hours outside the Sri Lankan city of Colombo. Their conversation on Wednesday was unusually brief, just 5 minutes. Ms. Akanayak felt something was weighing on her daughter's mind, but they didn't speak about it. She asked me to go to sleep, Ms. Akanayak recalled. She was planning to visit her daughter in 2 months to see her and her grandchildren. Her worry grew when she didn't hear from Darshani on Thursday night. The next morning, when Ms. Akanayak heard from a local news outlet about a Sri Lankan family that had been killed in Ottawa, she knew immediately it was her daughters, she said. Ms. Akanayak said her daughter, son-in-law, and their 3 oldest children were newcomers to Canada from Sri Lanka. Kelly, the youngest, was born in Canada. They were seeking work, she said, and good education for the children. Darshani was a devoted Buddhist who rejected the pull of materialism, Ms. Akanayak said, adding that before leaving for Canada, she had donated piles of her belongings to another family after a flood. More recently, she asked her mother to donate a child's bicycle she had left behind when she emigrated. She was a kind, loving, and peaceful young lady, looking out for her parents and her children. As much as old age doesn't always depict wisdom, young age doesn't also always depict innocence. Following through with the story of the killing of the young Wickramasinga family, it would have been safe to assume that they were brutally murdered by a much more mature person who probably had scores to settle with the family, or probably a drunk guest who was just recovering from the death of a loved one. Unfortunately, the perpetrator of this evil act was a 19-year-old boy, one who was generously accommodated by Danushka Wickramasinga. What connects Danushka to Febrio de Zoysa? Initially, Mr. Wickramasinga was studying and residing at a boarding house with de Zoysa. However, when the young man was asked to vacate his boarding accommodations by the landlord, it was Mr. Wickramasinga who had offered him lodging in the basement of his home a few months prior. He was known for posting videos of the video game Minecraft on YouTube. His YouTube account has now been taken down. A spokesperson for Google, which owns YouTube, said via email that following the tragic attack in Ottawa, the trust and safety team identified and terminated a YouTube channel associated with the suspect by the Creator Responsibility Guidelines. He stated that, if a user's off-platform behavior harms the YouTube community, they may take action. The man behind the mask, the alleged murderer, was a 19-year-old former Algonquin College student. This unassuming young man, who once walked the halls of a respected educational institution, stands accused of the tragic crime that has saddened the hearts of people throughout Ottawa and beyond. He is also a Sri Lankan national and now faces 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. It was reported and confirmed that the family even celebrated his birthday together some months before. They got him cheesecake because he said he liked it, just to make his birthday memorable. Mr. Dhanushka Wickramasinghe had also met the suspect's parents in Sri Lanka. Mr. Dhanushka Wickramasinghe arrived home around 10:30 p.m. and found Dhazoisa with a knife. According to Sumanarathana, the resident monk and director of the Hilda Jayward Hanarmaya Buddhist monastery, he wrestled with his assailant. Then he felt the sting of a knife or other edged weapon slashing across his face. The police later called it a knife-like weapon. He was also stabbed in the chest and in the back, and at least one of his fingers was cut off. Blood was everywhere. Inside, his entire family was already dead, including the family friend. During the attack, Wickramasinghe begged Febrio Dhazoisa not to harm his family, and asked if he had harmed them in any way. Febrio said no, and that was a lie. Wickramasinghe then discovered the bodies of his family, according to Sumanarathana, and locked himself in a room due to shock, fear, and deep worry. Later, he ran back outside, screaming, bleeding, inconsolable. Neighbors summoned the police, who arrived a few minutes later and subdued the attacker. The police arrived around 10:52 p.m., and Dhazoisa was arrested shortly before 11 p.m. At 11:17 p.m., Ottawa police stated that day on social media that there was a police operation ongoing in the 300th block of Berrigan Drive and to avoid the area. On Thursday, March 7th, around 2:30 a.m., the Ottawa police said on social media that the OPS was on the scene of a homicide, with multiple victims confirmed deceased. They also stated that one additional person had been taken to an Ottawa area hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. One arrest had been made, and there was no continued threat to public safety. At 6:15 a.m., the police said in a press release that the homicide unit was investigating the deaths of 6 people who were found at the address the night prior. The victims were identified as 2 adults and 4 children. Police said their identities had not been confirmed as of that time, calling it a tragic and complex investigation. I want to emphasize this was a senseless act of violence, and it was a crime. It was perpetrated on purely innocent people. Ottawa Police Chief Eric Stubbs told CBC Radio that the homicide was a mass shooting, but later in the day corrected his statement to say it was a mass killing. The police held a press conference at 1:30 p.m. They identified the victims and said charges had been laid against Dhazoisa. At the police press conference, Stubbs told the reporters that the police believe an edged weapon with sharp edges like a knife was used in the killings. While some murderers have motives behind their ruthless actions, others perform a senseless act of murder without reason and cause. Bhante Sunitha, who was a resident monk and director of the Hilda Jayward Hanarmaya Buddhist monastery, said that all was not well with Febrio Dhazoisa. He had dropped out of school and also had thoughts of suicide. A spokesperson for Algonquin College confirmed that Dhazoisa had been a student there, and the last time he attended school was in the winter 2023 semester. In an interview with the suspect's relative, Febrio Dhazoisa's aunt, she stated that the family had been so nice to him. She says the accused is her brother's oldest son and came to Canada 2 years ago. She described her nephew as quiet and a good student. She was visibly shaken and said, "They were such a wonderful family." She confirmed that Wickramasinghe had been working to move his family from Sri Lanka to Ottawa and invited Dhazoisa to live with him at the Berrigan Drive house once his family came over. She says Dhazoisa stayed with relatives in Ottawa before moving in with the Wickramasinghe family, but also mentioned that he recently cut off his relatives. It's obvious that the Wickramasinghe family had been nothing but good to Febrio, so what then could have made him kill the entire family, leaving Mr. Wickramasinghe severely injured? Is there dirty linen yet to be unveiled? Dhazoisa arrived in Canada 2 years ago. He lived with his aunt during his first month in the country, then later met Wickramasinghe at Algonquin. Then suddenly, he seemed to break off all contact with his relatives, blocking their phone numbers and social media accounts. He took actions that displayed his possible desire to remain in isolation, detaching himself from those who cared about him, and from those who were the only family he had in Canada. While some established newspapers have relied on Canadian or international reporting for their coverage, there has also been original reporting in Sri Lanka, since Febrio lived most of his life and has his roots there. Journalists sought out family members connected to the victims. The killings have also produced various speculations about the motives of the accused, both on social media and on some news websites. Baseless rumors have floated theories blaming everything from video games to visa issues to mystical elements and superstitions, such as the Great Curse. None of the charges against Dezoisa have been proven, and the court has not had any evidence surrounding the circumstances of the crimes. To date, police have yet to identify a possible motive. The family's landlord had been dropping off luggage at the airport, en route to what he hoped would be a relaxing vacation with his family in Mexico, when he got a call from the police. What they told him was unimaginable. 6 people dead at the Ottawa townhome he rents out, including 4 young children. Harpreet Chabra, the property owner of the home, told Global News when he was reached by phone on a Friday that he did not know or have a clue that the couple had recently had a new baby and that the accused killer lived there. He claimed not to even know Febrio Dezoisa at all, because he had leased out only to the family, and he didn't know that they had accommodated an additional person to live with them. Chabra is an Ottawa mortgage agent who rented out the property on Berrigan Drive in Barhaven to a family who had recently come to Canada from Sri Lanka. Chabra says he did not know Ghani American was living in the house either. According to the property owner, the Wickramasinghe family moved into the Barhaven home last summer. He says the father arrived in Canada first and waited for his wife to come with their children. The property owner describes the surviving father as a very nice guy and a good tenant. He said he was the kind of tenant who always paid his rent on time and also took good care of the house. He added, and expressed his disbelief towards the terrible and unfortunate occurrence in the family. He added that he was lost for words concerning the matter. Chabra had hoped his own family's trip would be a way for his wife and children to decompress after the sudden loss of his sister-in-law, not yet 50 years old, to cancer earlier this year. This second, unexpected loss has them again mourning. He mentioned that he was trying to help his wife heal by taking her off for vacation, and that was when they heard at the airport that the terrible, sad incident had happened. Ghani American, a 40-year-old man, was said to be an acquaintance of Danushka Wickramasinghe. He was also killed by Febrio Dezoisa, but before his death and his arrival in Ottawa, he definitely must have had a life. He had only arrived in Canada 2 months before his painful demise. He left behind a wife and 2 kids in Sri Lanka before relocating to Canada. He most likely had plans to relocate them to Canada after a while as well. He used to have an active social media presence and appeared to be trying to establish himself as an entrepreneur in his new Canadian country, perhaps to support his family in Sri Lanka. A Facebook profile with the name Ghani American describes him as a sales and digital marketing consultant. He operated a business called VIP Air Tours and frequently made posts advertising Sri Lanka as a travel destination, with scenic photos of the tropical island, while offering to help people make travel bookings to the country. His last public post on Facebook was on February 20th, where he thanked people for their birthday wishes. On March 28, Febrio made a brief court appearance by phone, where he could only be heard stating his name and birthday and confirming his next court appearance. He was not previously charged with any crime in the country. The 19-year-old made his first court appearance while wearing a black tracksuit jacket. At the time, his lawyer Ewan Little said he had the opportunity to get quite a bit of disclosure. Dezoisa's next court appearance was then scheduled on April 18th, while his judicial pretrial was scheduled for April 17th. Dezoisa was ordered not to have any form of contact with a few witnesses, including the surviving husband and father. His lawyer said on March 14th that he is currently in protective custody. There was no video link available for the hearing, and Dezoisa's appearance was limited to audio only. His lawyer, Ewan Little, told the court that he had received a volume of evidence so far and had actively been holding discussions with the Crown Attorney's office over further disclosure. The assigned prosecutor, Crown Attorney Louise Tansey, has extensive experience leading the prosecution on a number of difficult cases involving children. At a previous court appearance, Little said he had been in touch with the young man's family and that they were, obviously, very upset. He said they did not reside in Sri Lanka and declined to say where they lived. When asked about whether Febrio was going to undergo a mental health assessment, Little said it was probably going to be a few months from that time. He declined to comment on Febrio Dezoisa's mental state, saying he had only met with him over a video and not in person. Febrio Dezoisa's lawyer also mentioned that he has no plan to seek bail. Legal experts said that Febrio's case might take years to make its way through the justice system. Daphne Gilbert, a professor of criminal law at the University of Ottawa, clearly stated that it could take 2 to 3 years. According to her, there are a lot of other preliminary factors to contend with, including whether or not Febrio de Zoysa is fit to stand trial. She added that the first thing that would probably happen is a lot of psychiatric consultation, which would determine whether Febrio has the mental capacity to withstand the trial process. Sylvia Rich, a law professor at the University of Ottawa, noted the rule that trials must conclude within 30 months, or 2.5 years after charges are laid. Then, she added that if de Zoysa is found fit to stand trial, his lawyer could raise a defense of not being criminally responsible because of a mental disorder. The investigation of the March 6th killings could also be lengthy and complicated. She said that for them to determine more about who the accused was, how he came to be in the house, and some other needed information, would definitely take some time. She continued and stated that on the outside, the entire case should be done 30 months from that period, but she added it could take less time, and de Zoysa will likely be incarcerated for the duration. But she also mentioned how slow the justice system can be, and that there are some other complicating factors, such as a backlog of other cases, which need to be sorted as well. The death of the Wickramasinghe family, shortly after they moved from Sri Lanka to Ottawa, Canada, hit not just the families affected, but also the neighborhood and the nation at large. On a cold, rainy Saturday morning filled with grief, tears, and disbelief, the handmade card from 7-year-old Anuka Wickramasinghe's classmates at Monsignor Paul Baxter Catholic School spelled out a community's sorrow. There were lots of colorful letters that soon began to drip away as the raindrops fell. The children that were present shared their memories. "We'll miss you, Anuka." Anuka's friends had a lot to say about him. They mentioned that he was fast, kind, intelligent, imaginative, a good friend, and a soccer player. "We will miss your smile," they said. It was clear that Anuka's teacher was overcome with emotion. He wiped his tears, and then set his cards among the other pile of flowers, cards, and stuffed animals. Some flickering candles were the centerpiece of the vigil for Anuka, his mother, Darshani Delanthika Ekanyak, sisters Ushwini, Renaya, and Kelly, and family friend Gamini American. More than 100 mourners offered tearful prayers and calls for solidarity and compassion on the 17th of March at the funeral for the Sri Lankan family slain in one of the worst mass killings in Ottawa's history. Ajahn Varadimo, a monk who spoke at the funeral, asked those grieving around the world to focus on supporting each other instead of leaning into despair or anger. Mr. Wickramasinghe was seen crying at the ceremony, his hands clasped in prayer with one finger bandaged. He was surrounded by family members, including a man sobbing into a handkerchief. He was obviously devastated and was bleeding with grief within. The funeral organizers said on the 15th of March that he had requested privacy to mourn the loss of his family, but he was thankful for the outpouring of public support since his relatives died. 5 coffins were placed at the front of the room, including 3 smaller white ones and 2 larger wooden caskets, one of which had framed photos of both Ekanyak and her baby. The ceremony included audio recordings from the wife and daughter of Gamini American and American Mediansalag. His loved ones in Sri Lanka were unable to travel to Canada for the funeral. The service also included a Buddhist ritual, as well as reflections from preachers from various religions, who prayed for surviving relatives to have strength. Dignitaries from multiple levels of government who were present also paid their regards during the funeral. Danuska Wickramasinghe said that he was torn and devastated by the loss of his beloved wife and his children. He also mentioned that he was mourning the loss of his friend, Gamini, who was staying with the family. He thanked the first responders and hospital staff for helping him navigate through the initial shock and chaos that began as a result of the tragedy. Danuska also said that he was thankful for the support of the Buddhist Congress of Canada, Ottawa's Sri Lankan community, and the wider public for their thoughts and prayers. Money might have been the least of Danuska Wickramasinghe's worries, but at least it was a good way for the community could express their support and assure him of their presence. The following day after the brutal killing, a fundraiser with a goal of $200,000 was set up on GoFundMe to help the surviving father and family members of the deceased in Canada and Sri Lanka. Kota Tawaku, the monastery director, said 20 members of its community had set up a GoFundMe page coordinated by the temple to provide financial support for the families of the victims. The Buddhist Congress of Canada, BCC, facilitated the fundraiser. On the 11th of March, 2024, nearly $162,000 had already been raised by over 1,100 donors. This swift, heartfelt action of the community reflected their passion genuine grief and intentionality towards the deceased and the man who was left behind. It was an action that definitely spoke louder than words. Anoli Fernando was a resident of Ottawa. She didn't know the family personally, but she has family ties to Sri Lanka. Her mother called her on the Thursday of the incident to tell her she'd heard of a family friend's in-laws who were victims of a tragic murder. Fernando said she doesn't often donate to charities or causes, and even though she didn't know or have any familial connection with the victims, she felt the need to help where she could, donating $1,000. According to her, she donated because it just hits close to home. Danushka Wickramasinghe displayed a rare reaction to his family's killer, Febrio de Zoysa. From his hospital bed, he managed to offer some compassion for his family's accused killer when they paid him a visit. Several other community members were able to visit Danushka Wickramasinghe, the lone survivor of the attack, in hospital. Even though he was tired and had visible physical marks from the attack, Wickramasinghe was said to have smiled as the visitors entered the hospital room. A local temple's resident monk, Bandi Sunitha, said he placed his hands on Wickramasinghe to show him the love of his community and provide him with strength. Those who spoke with Wickramasinghe said he even showed empathy for the accused killer. The news, articles, and the internet do not say much about the accused killer of the Wickramasinghe family, Febrio de Zoysa. His parents refused to share their place of residence. No friend has come out to claim that they knew him from school or somewhere else. The secrecy around this murderer is quite fascinating. Many choose to believe that all the information we need about him has been provided, while others demand to know more, especially as to why a 19-year-old boy could kill not just one but 4 babies. There is still a thick mystery cloud surrounding this mass killing case that is yet to be unraveled. Aside from the fact that many feel horrified by the crime, some fear it could have a direct impact on their lives. The murder has also triggered warnings about welcoming strangers when staying abroad. Some people are also worried that this case might cause the Canadian government to become even more strict when accepting international students. Regardless, the love and compassion the community showed the Wickramasinghe family just after a short time of living in Ottawa shows how much impact they made in their community, even in the little time they lived there. It's quite relieving to know that Danushka Wickramasinghe, the lone survivor, has family, loyal friends, and his community to lean on during his time of grief. Case 5. James Craig Kaler, the patriarch, appeared to have it all. With a 6-figure salary and a stable career, he was the provider of a dream life. His wife, Karen, embodied the perfect housewife and supermom, managing the home and supporting their 3 kids, Emily, Lauren, and Sean. From straight-A report cards to local sports stardom, the Kaler kids seemed to thrive under their parents' guidance. They were everything a family was supposed to be, or so it seemed. Let's rewind the clock, and you'll find the story of how this perfect family was built on sacrifices, compromises, and silent struggles. For starters, Karen gave up her dreams of earning an engineering degree to marry Craig and support his ambitions. The couple tied the knot in December 1985 and moved to Colorado, where Craig had landed a promising job. At the time, Karen was still in her second year of college, with several years left to complete her degree. But she couldn't bear the idea of a long-distance relationship, so Karen made a life-changing decision. She left school to focus on her marriage and Craig's career. It was a sacrifice she wholeheartedly embraced, determined to create a happy life together. Their first major milestone came on April 8, 1991, when Karen gave birth to their eldest daughter, Emily. Life seemed picture-perfect. Craig's career continued to flourish, while Karen took on the role of a stay-at-home mom. However, Karen's mother, Pat, noticed how Karen was always putting Craig's needs before her own, even after just having a baby. It seemed off, like Karen wasn't living for herself anymore. In 1992, Craig's career brought another change, a lucrative job opportunity in Greenville, Texas. The family relocated, and in May 1993, they welcomed their second daughter, Lauren. By all appearances, the Kalers had it all: Craig's professional success, Karen's dedication to her family, and 2 bright, thriving daughters. Emily was the firstborn, and she was a smart kid, a pleaser, wanted to do good, kind of like her mom, creative and smart. Emily played the drum set and sang, and Lauren played the bass and sang. Yet beneath the surface, tensions quietly simmered. One of those tensions arose from a disagreement over having more children. Karen felt their family was complete with 2 kids, but Craig wanted another. In a strikingly unorthodox move, the couple created a written agreement. Karen consented to having 1 more child, on the condition that she could undergo a procedure to prevent any further pregnancies afterward. Craig agreed, and in March 1999, their son, Sean, was born. To honor their agreement, Craig later underwent a vasectomy, ensuring no more surprises in their growing family. By this point, life seemed to stabilize. Craig's next job opportunity led them to Weatherford, Texas, a quiet suburb near Dallas, where his career continued to ascend. Once again, Karen adapted, immersing herself in her new community. She joined a local moms group and eventually became its president, building a strong network of friends and resources. She also made sure her kids stayed active and involved. Emily excelled in school and music, Lauren thrived in sports and band, and Sean became a rising baseball star. From the outside, it looked like the perfect life. But Craig's obsession with perfection left little room for anything less than flawless. He held everyone to incredibly high standards, including his own family. His daughter Lauren, who struggled with ADD and didn't get straight A's like Emily, became a target for his criticism. To Craig, Lauren wasn't good enough, and he didn't hesitate to ridicule her for it. And Craig's need for control didn't stop at his family. People began to see him as uptight, rude, and almost arrogant. His obsession with appearances made him difficult to work with. He had little respect for women in leadership roles, even telling others that they didn't belong in those positions. He also gained a reputation for being cheap, borrowing tools for home projects instead of buying them, tagging along to strip clubs with coworkers and asking them to buy him dances. Despite earning a solid $180,000 a year, Craig kept a tight grip on the family's finances. Karen had a strict weekly allowance, and every time she went shopping, she had to save the receipts. Craig would scrutinize each one when he got home, blowing up in anger if he thought something was unnecessary or too expensive. But it wasn't just about money. Craig's control extended to every aspect of their life, even their sex life. Every night at 8:30 p.m., Karen had to be in bed for their routine. If she took a phone call after 8 p.m., she would whisper to her friends, apologizing and saying she had to go because Craig required her to be in the bedroom at a specific time. If she didn't do what he wanted bedtime at 9, she would, quote, pay for it. It became such a routine that their kids even knew not to disturb them after 8:30. Even when Karen was sick, she had to comply with Craig's demands. Refusing him was dangerous. His anger would often turn violent, and Karen knew it was easier to just give in. Now, things haven't always been this way. When they first got together, Karen's life wasn't controlled so strictly. But as time went on, Craig's demands grew more extreme. He even suggested bringing a third person, specifically a woman, into their relationship, just to watch Karen and her together. Karen wasn't comfortable with this at all, but she found it difficult to say no. Desperate for some space and something of her own, Karen secretly joined a gym. She'd always enjoyed working out, and it was a way to regain some control over her life. Craig, ever controlling, refused to pay for the membership, so Karen worked odd jobs like baking cakes to fund it herself. By January 2006, she had saved enough to join Powerhouse Gym, and she quickly became a regular. Eventually, she even took on a part-time job as a personal trainer. Surprisingly, Craig didn't mind her working at the gym, but he set one condition. She had to be home by the time the kids returned from school. And just like always, Karen excelled at whatever she did. She quickly made friends at the gym, and soon developed a habit of complaining about Craig at work. She'd talk about how angry he always was, how nothing she did ever seemed good enough, and how they were constantly fighting. Their fights were so intense that sometimes one of the kids would have to intervene just to break it up. On a bad day, things would get physical, and Karen would end up with bruises to prove it. Everyone at the gym knew about her unhappiness, and how she wanted out of the relationship, but Craig's control over her was suffocating. She was nearing her breaking point, and things only seemed to get worse when she met a personal trainer named Sunny. Sunny was calm and understanding, and she helped Karen open up about the darkest parts of her relationship, things she couldn't share with anyone else. Over time, Sunny and Karen became more than friends. The two grew romantically and sexually intimate. There's some speculation about how this happened. Some believe that Craig encouraged it after he had previously asked Karen to bring a third person into their relationship, while others think Karen and Sunny had already started an affair before Craig even knew about it. Regardless of how it began, their relationship evolved into a threesome. Craig even sent Sunny flirty texts, bought flowers for both women, and encouraged them to take weekend getaways. However, later on, he denied pushing the two together. While Karen and Sonny's relationship was out in the open, Craig told a different story. He claimed that Karen was ruining their marriage, and the biggest issue was that his carefully curated image of the perfect family was crumbling. In 2008, Craig saw an opportunity to regain control. He was offered a job in Columbia, Missouri, that paid more than his current position, and it would separate Karen from Sonny. He accepted the job offer immediately. Karen, however, was devastated. She didn't want to leave Sonny, but also had roots in Weatherford. Her kids were involved in school activities, the girls were in a band, Sean was playing baseball, and Karen had deep ties to local volunteer groups. Still, as always, Craig's wishes prevailed. He moved to Columbia a few months before Karen, leaving her to wrap things up at home. During this time, Karen and Sonny decided to stay together long distance, though Craig had no idea. He thought it was just a temporary fling, and once he separated them, Karen would return to the obedient wife he expected her to be. When Karen eventually moved to Columbia with the kids, Craig believed everything was back to normal. He even allowed her to enroll in the University of Missouri for a health science degree and continue working as a fitness instructor. However, after her time with Sonny, Karen had experienced a taste of freedom. She wasn't satisfied with just being allowed to go to school or work. She didn't want a life where Craig felt entitled to control her every move. Once Craig realized he was losing control over his wife, Karen, he began to tighten his grip even harder. He started obsessively monitoring her every move, who she talked to, what was in her emails, where she went, and it quickly spiraled into a complete invasion of her privacy. This toxic obsession reached its breaking point in December 2008 during an old friend's New Year's Eve party in Weatherford. Neither Craig nor Karen expected Sonny to be at the party, but when they walked in, there she was, the last person Craig ever wanted to see. To make matters worse, Karen was openly flirty with Sonny. They were laughing, hugging, drinking from the same glass with 2 straws, and even getting cozy in front of everyone. At this point, Craig was furious. His jealousy and rage took over, especially because the relationship between Karen and Sonny was now completely public. In Craig's mind, it was a complete slap in the face, and the disrespect was unbearable. The anger exploded at the party, with Craig screaming at Karen and Karen screaming back. It wasn't just a private argument. It was a spectacle. Their fight became so intense that Craig, humiliated and furious, declared to the entire party that Karen was having an affair. In retaliation, Karen kissed Sonny right in front of everyone. The host, understandably uncomfortable, asked them to leave, but the drama didn't end there. The fight continued outside on the front lawn, and it soon turned physical. Craig, consumed by his anger, shoved Karen, causing her to fall and hit her head on the ground. By the morning, both of them were reeling from the fallout. Karen, despite the chaos, began to have second thoughts about the way she was pushing Craig. She told Sonny that they needed to take a break from their relationship, but Sonny wasn't having it. She told Karen that the problem wasn't with her, but with Craig. Sonny was deeply concerned for Karen's safety, especially after witnessing his violent outbursts. So, in late January 2009, Karen made the brave decision to file for divorce. She didn't leave the house immediately, but she started sleeping in a separate room. She also continued her long-distance relationship with Sonny. Craig, still obsessively controlling, kept monitoring Karen's emails and even went through her things. He found multiple greeting cards from Sonny and used that to track her every move. Each time Karen made plans to meet Sonny, Craig would follow her, trying to sabotage their time together. His jealousy knew no bounds. At work, Craig became increasingly unhinged. He would carry around a photo album, showing it off to coworkers and saying things like, "Isn't this a happy family? Why doesn't Karen want to be a happy family?" His bizarre behavior made everyone uncomfortable, but Craig didn't seem to notice or care. He was too consumed by his need to control Karen's life. The tension reached a boiling point in March 2009, after Craig gave a speech at a city council meeting. Karen, there to support him, was dragged into another heated argument. This time, Craig's anger turned physical. He assaulted Karen, and she called the police. Craig was arrested for third-degree domestic assault. In her statement to the police, Karen described how Craig physically blocked her exit, cornering her against a cabinet, and how his behavior had grown increasingly violent and controlling over time. Despite Craig's denial of the assault, claiming he was only trying to give Karen a hug, the marks on Karen's body told a different story. Craig was arrested and charged. Karen moved out of their home, taking the kids with her, and rented a place on the other side of Columbia. She also withdrew $50,000 from their shared bank account, signaling that she was finally breaking free from Craig's toxic and dangerous control. Now, the arrest of Craig was nothing short of devastating. As a city official, his actions were front-page news, and when his bizarre and unsettling behavior at work came to light, it only made things worse. Eventually, the city issued a public statement saying Craig resigned due to difficult family issues, but the truth was far more complicated. The fact that he had been fired not by choice was a blow to his already fragile ego. He couldn't handle the fact that his once perfect reputation was now in tatters, no job, no family, and no control over anything. Craig packed up and left his house, heading back to his parents' farm in Kansas. He hoped that hard work on the farm would help clear his mind, but the distance didn't make things better. If anything, it fueled his obsession with Karen, his ex-wife. Craig couldn't understand why Karen had left him. In his mind, he had been the perfect husband. He had provided everything, and yet she walked away. He refused to accept that his controlling behavior could have pushed her to the brink. At this point, he still stalked her, reading her texts, emails, and even her cards. He couldn't let go, and he blamed Sonny for everything. When Sonny sent Craig a text telling him that Karen didn't love him the way he thought, Craig became enraged. He started calling Karen and Sonny names, using homophobic slurs, even though he had been okay with Karen's relationship with Sonny, as long as he could watch and be involved in some twisted way. But what really pushed him over the edge was his daughters turning away from him. They were tired of his controlling ways and wanted to make their own choices. Emily, his oldest daughter, was the first to break away. She picked a college he didn't approve of, showing she wasn't going to live by his rules anymore. To Craig, this felt like a slap in the face. He blamed Karen even more, saying she had brainwashed the girls into going against him. Things only got even worse when one of his daughters posted on Facebook admitting she was bisexual. Instead of supporting her, Craig saw this as another reason to lash out. He was convinced their mom had influenced this too. Interestingly, he started building a massive case against Karen, collecting over 3,500 pages of so-called evidence for his divorce attorney. This included screenshots of Karen and Sonny's private messages and notes about every time Karen visited Sonny. He even claimed that the two women had sex in front of the kids, but he never showed any proof of this. Craig's behavior became even more bizarre and disturbing. He told his friends about wanting to kill Sonny, but no one took him seriously. It's a common theme in these cases. People ignore the red flags until it's too late. It's also important to note that despite his rage toward Karen and Sonny, Craig was also sleeping with multiple women. His behavior was all over the place, but when it came to his son, Sean, things seemed a bit different. According to Craig, Sean was the one person who hadn't completely turned his back on him. Craig made an effort to spend time with his son, taking him hunting and fishing, trying to stay involved in his life. While he may have been a terrible husband to Karen and a distant, controlling father to his daughters by all accounts, he was still trying to be a decent dad to Sean. It was as if Sean was the last shred of hope for Craig, the one connection that hadn't been completely destroyed. Fast forward to Thanksgiving 2009. While Sean was with Craig, Karen was still trying to keep her family close. She wanted all of her children and her girlfriend, Sonny, to visit her grandmother, Dorothy, during the holiday. So the day after Thanksgiving, Karen went to pick up Sean from Craig's house and take him to Dorothy's. Dorothy, who was 89 years old, lived in a quiet farmhouse in Burlingame, Kansas, a tiny town with less than 1,000 residents. But on Saturday, November 29, 2009, a deputy was wrapping up some paperwork when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle in Burlingame. It was just after 6 p.m. when a neighbor reported that a small truck had been speeding through the area. They watched as the driver pulled up, got out of the truck, and started walking down the road. A few moments later, the man came back carrying a large object they couldn't identify. Fearing that it may have been a robbery, the neighbors grabbed a flashlight and went outside to confront him. But before they could get close, the man placed the object in the back seat of the truck, climbed in, and sped off. The neighbors quickly called the sheriff's office, and the deputy set out to investigate. But just minutes later, another call came in, one that would lead to a much darker discovery. The deputies immediately knew this was serious, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would find when they arrived. As they entered Dorothy's home, the first person they found was Dorothy herself. She was bleeding heavily on the kitchen floor, having been shot several times. She was still alive, but barely. They rushed to the next room, where Karen was found in the dining area. She had been shot twice and was already dead. In the lounge, they discovered 18-year-old Emily lying behind the couch. She too had been shot twice. The second shot likely paralyzed her instantly, and she had died. Then the deputy heard a faint voice calling for help from upstairs. It was Lauren. 16-year-old Lauren was still alive, but her injuries were severe. Like Dorothy, she had been shot multiple times and was barely holding on. As she was taken away, Lauren whispered the name Craig. When asked who that was, she weakly replied, "My dad." "Hold on. Don't move. I don't care. I know. Don't move. I don't want to die. We're going to take care of you, okay? Make me alive." And it didn't take long before Lauren, too, succumbed to her injuries and died. Dorothy, who had been fighting for her life with everything she had, followed soon after. That left us with the only surviving member of the family, Sean, an unwilling witness to this senseless bloodshed. According to his account, he and Karen had been sitting together, cleaning some old coins when the nightmare began. Without warning, Craig burst through the back door, rifle in hand, and opened fire on Karen. In the chaos, Sean ran for his life, desperate to escape. He scrambled for Karen's phone to call for help, but before he could, more gunshots echoed through the house. Terrified, he knew he had to get out, and so he fled, running for the neighbor next door. Understandably, a search warrant was issued immediately for Craig, and it didn't take long for the authorities to locate his car. Abandoned in the middle of nowhere, eerily out of place. Inside, the officers found a chilling scene: a stash of more ammunition, unopened bottles of anxiety medication, and a backpack packed with the essentials such as soap, toilet paper, and canned food, as if he had been preparing for something. But Craig himself was nowhere to be found. Hours later, though, he was spotted wandering aimlessly down a deserted road, disheveled and looking lost. When he saw the officers approach, he didn't try to run. Instead, he muttered, "I'm the guy you're looking for," and was arrested without a struggle. Craig's defense team argued that his mental health issues, including depression and multiple personality disorders, pushed him to the brink. They claimed he had snapped, unable to control his actions. However, the prosecution painted a much darker picture, one of a man whose actions were chillingly premeditated. To back up their claims, they presented a crucial piece of evidence. Craig's expert psychiatrist testified that while he did suffer from depression, he still had the clear ability to plan the murders. The fact that he spared Sean's life was a key detail, demonstrating that his actions were calculated, not impulsive. 2 years after the murders, the final trial began. Sean, now 12, showed extraordinary bravery as he took the stand to recount the horrifying events. With striking clarity, he described the moment he witnessed his father shoot his mother and the chaos that followed. His testimony left no doubt. Craig's actions weren't a spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment, but the culmination of months of simmering rage and calculated intent. Sunny also took the stand, shedding light on the abusive relationship between Karen and Craig. She recounted her attempts to protect Karen from Craig's volatile behavior, revealing that he initially appeared unfazed when she and Karen began their relationship. However, his demeanor shifted drastically, becoming hostile only after Karen decided to leave him. However, Sunny also admitted that her testimony was based on memory and what she had heard from Karen without physical evidence to back it up. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Craig was guilty of capital murder. His plea of insanity was rejected, leaving him to face the harshest punishments, either the death penalty or life without parole. Kaler showed no emotion today as he heard his fate. The execution sentence comes as retribution for the shooting deaths of 4 family members. Court at this time sentences the defendant for the crime of capital murder to death. James Craig Kaler opted not to speak on his own behalf, and even asked if he could leave the room to avoid hearing the victim impact statements. Chief Judge Phillip ordered him to stay. "I loved Grandma White, Karen, Emily, and Lauren very much. I will miss them until the end of my days." For many in the courtroom, justice had been served. But for Sean, the outcome was far from a relief. Sean, now 12 years old, had already endured unimaginable loss. He stood in court, his voice steady yet filled with emotion, and said, "I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. I do not want my whole family gone." These words, spoken by a child who had witnessed so much pain, left many stunned. Despite Craig's horrific actions, Sean still saw him as a father, a man who, in his eyes, had been kind and loving to him. Craig, on the other hand, showed no regret for the lives he had taken. After his sentencing, he began writing letters to various people, including the lead prosecutor. These weren't apologies. Instead, Craig claimed he felt relieved by what he had done, insisting that he had freed Sean from what he called a toxic environment. Craig's legal team quickly filed an appeal to the Kansas Supreme Court. They argued that the jury had been biased and claimed that his mental health issues hadn't been properly considered during the trial. But the court disagreed. One judge stated that Kansas law doesn't exonerate someone just because they're mentally ill, and another pointed out that Craig's mental health had been considered during sentencing. It just didn't excuse what he had done. In the end, Craig's appeal was denied. His options for further legal action grew slim, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices. As of now, he remains on death row, a stark reminder of the heinous crimes he committed. Justice may have been served, but it's hard to say if that truly balances the scale for the lives lost. We can only hope he spends his remaining days haunted by his actions, paying for the devastation he caused. As for Sean, his story is one of incredible resilience. Despite the trauma and struggles he endured, he managed to rise above it all. He graduated high school and now works in Kansas, a living testament to strength and perseverance in the face of unimaginable tragedy. His journey inspires hope, proving that even in the darkest times, there's a way forward. Case 6. On May 26, 1986, two men quietly snuck onto the McGlindsey family farm, hoping to steal some cherries during the season's peak. The farm looked peaceful, with lights flickering on and off in the house. But inside, something terrible was happening. Two members and one maid of the McGlindsey family had been brutally murdered with an axe by one of their own, James Dunham. The two men had no clue about the horror taking place inside the house, so they carried on with their plan. Meanwhile, James Dunham continued his brutal spree. After midnight, the head of the McGlindsey family returned home with his son and the farmhand. As soon as the father stepped inside, he was met with an axe to the head. Minutes later, his son walked in, only to be shot 5 times by James with a revolver. But James wasn't done yet. He then killed the farmhand in the barn before disappearing into the night, leaving only one survivor, his own child. This case remains one of the most horrifying and captivating true crimes in history. With a massive reward of $403,000 for information leading to James, dead or alive, the mystery surrounding his actions has left people speechless. What could have driven him to commit such an unspeakable act? How did he manage to disappear without a trace? In this story, we'll dig into every chilling detail, piecing together the clues to uncover the truth behind James Dunham's terrifying crime, and try to understand why someone would do something so horrific. Going to the town of Campbell, nestled in the heart of Northern California's fruit-growing industry, this is where the tragedy unfolded. A place brimming with life, with a bank, packing facilities and canneries all lined up along the railroad tracks, shipping local goods across the country. Farmers in the area had formed the Campbell Fruit Growers Union, showing just how important agriculture was to the town's success. And at the center of all this was Colonel Richard P. McGlindsey, a man who had come from Jefferson County, Virginia. He fought for the South during the Civil War, rising to the rank of colonel. After the war, he left behind his military career and became a well-known figure in his community. It was said that he was involved in everything, from publishing newspapers to politics and even animal husbandry. When he moved to Campbell, he bought a 56-acre cherry farm, becoming a respected member of the community. In fact, in 1893, he was chosen to represent Santa Clara County at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. It was clear that McGlindsey had a full life. He remarried after his first marriage ended in divorce, settling down with his second wife, Ada Wells, and her 2 children, Hattie and James, in a grand Victorian house on the ranch. But things took a darker turn when James Dunham entered the picture. James wasn't a man who easily made an impression on others. He lived in the background, a quiet figure who was seen but not truly known. Those who did interact with him often described him as cold, almost lifeless, with eyes that seemed to look right through people. It's important to note that he didn't have a history of violence, but he had a temper, one that could explode when things didn't go his way. James was a drifter, taking odd jobs when money was tight and turning to his mother for cash when work was scarce. Sometimes, if she refused to give him what he wanted, he'd lash out, like the time he killed her chickens in a fit of rage. James was the kind of man who seemed destined for a solitary life, so when he suddenly married Hattie Wells, it shocked everyone. Hattie had once been engaged to James' younger brother, Charlie, but broke off the engagement after she saw him with another woman. Rumors began to swirl that James and Hattie's marriage wasn't about love, it was about revenge. Now at first, James and Hattie had big dreams of traveling the world, and they never really stayed in one place for long. But this lifestyle came with a lot of problems for James. He couldn't keep up with the pressure to provide for Hattie, and with one failed business after another, plus loans he couldn't pay back, things just spiraled. His credit took a hit, and that put a huge strain on their marriage. At one point, while they were living in Sacramento, Hattie noticed her jewelry and favorite watch had gone missing. She reported them stolen, but not long after, her things turned up at a local pawn shop. The receipt clearly showed that James had sold them. Even though no charges were pressed, the damage was done, and the trust between them started to crumble. With no money left, the McGlindsey family decided to take Hattie and James in at their cherry farm, hoping it would help. But instead of things improving, it only seemed to make everything worse. James's behavior didn't just put a strain on his marriage with Hattie, it also caused friction within the McGlindsey family. He was known to argue frequently with Colonel McGlindsey, and things got so bad that he once threatened to sue the colonel over a minor injury he got while working on the farm. Even Hattie's mother, Ada, who was famous for being kind and welcoming, couldn't find a way to connect with him. What made it worse was how James treated Hattie after they moved into the McGlindsey home. He would often verbally abuse Hattie, sometimes in front of the entire family, belittling her without holding back. This behavior didn't sit well with Hattie's brother, Jimmy, and the two men clashed often. Their heated arguments nearly turned into physical fights on more than one occasion. In this tense atmosphere, James began disappearing for days at a time, leaving everyone wondering if the marriage was falling apart. Then, in late 1895, the McGlindsey family was hit with surprising news. Hattie was pregnant. For a while, this news brought a rare calm to the household. James, now 30 years old, seemed determined to change for the better. He even took a big step by enrolling in pre-law classes at Santa Clara University, giving everyone hope that brighter days might finally be ahead. So, on May 4, 1896, Hattie gave birth to a baby boy, Percy Osborne. The family celebrated the arrival of the little one, their joy filling the air. But as happy as the moment was, it didn't take long, just 3 weeks, for the cracks to begin showing again. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day. So, if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. According to official reports, the events of that fateful night began unfolding at 8:30 in the evening on May 26th. Colonel R. P. McGlindsey and Jimmy Wells stepped out onto the front porch, climbed into a waiting carriage, and gave the signal for Georgia Chable, the driver, to head off. Left behind at the house were Hattie, baby Percy, their housemaid, and nanny Minnie Schlesser, and Hattie's mother, Ada. Meanwhile, James Dunham, who had supposedly been in San Jose attending classes since Sunday, was nowhere to be seen, or so it seemed. In a small cabin about 100 yards from the main house, Bob Briscoe, the farm manager, was wrapping up a long day of work. It was cherry harvest season, and the hot weather made the grueling labor even harder. Exhausted, Bob stretched out on his cot, ready for a good night's sleep, before starting it all over again the next day. Little did everyone know, James had secretly returned to the farm at dusk. Like a predator in the wild, he hid in the shadows, biding his time. Sometime after 9 o'clock, he crept from his hiding spot and headed for the barn. There he picked up a single-bladed axe. After that, James wasted no time and slipped into the house through the back door, moving as silently as a shadow. He paused outside Ada McGlindsey's room on the first floor, likely making sure she was sound asleep. Once confident, he climbed the stairs, his steps slow and deliberate. Upstairs, his wife Hattie and their 3-week-old baby were in the bedroom. Hattie, however, wasn't asleep. She was at the dressing table brushing her hair when she noticed James entering the room. Her eyes must have caught the glint of the axe in his hand, but she had no time to react. Before she could even scream, James dropped the axe and lunged at her. His hands wrapped tightly around her throat, silencing her cries before they could echo through the house. His grip was merciless, and later, the autopsy would reveal he had crushed her cervical vertebrae. When her body finally went limp, James let her drop to the floor, emotionless, and reached for the axe again. The commotion couldn't have gone unnoticed. Minnie, the nanny, heard the sounds from her room and instinctively got up to check on what was happening. As she entered the bedroom, she came face to face with James and the axe. Without hesitation, he swung it at her, landing a brutal blow to her head. The force was so violent that it split her skull in two, killing her instantly. and for reasons that remain a mystery, James then tore strips of bed linen and stuffed them into the mouths of his victims, as if to silence them even further. Now, Minnie likely let out a scream before her life was cut short, and that sound was enough to wake Ada McGlinchey downstairs. So she put on her robe and stepped out of her room, calling up the stairs to check if everything was okay. The response she got was terrifying, not in words, but in the form of James Dunham, standing at the top of the stairs, blood-soaked axe in hand. Instead of freezing in fear, Ada bolted into the dining room, determined to fight James with everything she had. As she ran, she didn't hold back, throwing anything she could grab, from cups to plates to vases, all in an effort to stop him. The mess left behind told the tale. When the house was searched, investigators found shattered glass, broken plates, and smashed vases scattered everywhere, from the kitchen all the way to the dining room. It's likely that some of the broken glass ended up piercing James' feet, leaving a trail of blood on the floor. But instead of slowing him down, the pain only seemed to make him angrier, pushing him into an even more violent frenzy. But Ada's strength couldn't match James' rage, and eventually he caught up to her. In one final act of defiance, Ada managed to scratch his face so fiercely that his skin was marked with bloody fingernail grooves. This moment of resistance allowed her to break free, and she ran toward her bedroom, hoping to escape. However, that's where her fight ended. Later, it was clear from her position that she had been trying to crawl away when James struck the fatal blow. Reports suggested that Ada endured the most brutal attack of all, likely because she fought back so fiercely. The examiner could barely count how many times James struck her with the axe, as each blow seemed more savage than the last. It was even noted that James appeared to take twisted pleasure in mutilating his victim, as though each swing of the axe was a release for his monstrous rage. This was also the same time when two men sneaked onto the farm, hoping to steal some cherries. They didn't expect to witness anything, as the night was eerily quiet. While they kept an eye on the house, watching for any signs they might be caught, they noticed the lights flickering. Then, about 10 minutes later, James Dunham stepped outside to sit on the porch and smoke a cigarette. Seeing this, the two men panicked, thinking they'd be discovered, so they quickly decided to leave. Fast forward to 11 o'clock that night. Colonel McGlinchey, his stepson Jimmy Wells, and their driver George pulled up the driveway after a meeting. The meeting had probably run late, since it was an election year in 1896, and they had been at a political gathering for the American Protective Association, a group trying to limit Catholic influence in the government. When McGlinchey stepped out of the carriage, he told George to leave the barn doors open, so the horses could stay cool. After a quick goodnight, he headed up the steps to the house. But as soon as he walked inside, someone jumped out from the shadows and hit him in the head with something heavy, knocking him out cold. Jimmy Wells, who was a few steps behind, saw the whole thing and rushed in to help. He saw the attacker raise an axe to strike again, but without thinking, Jimmy lunged forward and grabbed the axe, stopping the blow just in time. Despite still being sore from a recent bike accident, the 22-year-old managed to pull the axe away from the attacker. For a moment it seemed like Jimmy was in control, but then out of nowhere, a gunshot rang out and a bullet hit him in the shoulder. Before he could react, another shot struck him in the chest, and he collapsed. His last instinct was to crawl toward the parlor, but as he reached the doorway, a final bullet struck his back. The axe slipped from his hand as he fell, and as he lay dying, James Dunham fired one last shot into his head. When they found Jimmy's body, it was reported that his clothes were still smoldering from the gunpowder burns. With his brother-in-law out of the way, Dunham turned his attention to finishing off Colonel McGlinchey, who was still unconscious in the entryway, but when he came back to check on the colonel, he discovered that the old man had somehow managed to escape. It turned out that when Dunham swung the axe, he had missed. The blade struck the handle instead, knocking McGlinchey out, but not killing him. Dazed but alive, the colonel had gotten up and fled outside, calling for help as he staggered toward the cabin where Briscoe, a farm servant, was sleeping. Panicked that McGlinchey might get away, Dunham aimed his revolver at him and fired, but the gun clicked. There were no more live rounds. Furious, he cursed, dropped the gun on the porch, and pulled out another one. This time, he fired recklessly into the night, desperately trying to end the colonel's life. While this was happening, a neighbor about 300 yards away was lying awake in bed, trying to get some sleep despite the room's uncomfortable warmth. He had left the window open to catch the night air, but nothing seemed to help. He tried reading to drift off, but it didn't work. Then, just before 11:30, he heard the sharp crack of gunshots and cries for help coming from the McGlinchey farm. which he could see from his window. Sensing something was terribly wrong, he quickly got out of bed, dressed hastily, and rushed over to see if his neighbor needed help. By then, Colonel McGlinchey had taken refuge in the cabin where he found Bob Briscoe, the farmhand, who had been woken by the chaos and was standing frozen in fear in the corner. McGlinchey locked the door as James stood outside, demanding he come out. McGlinchey refused, and James fired 2 shots through the door. There were cries from inside, but James kept demanding the colonel to surrender. The colonel, bloodied and weak, told him that he had already been shot and was as good as dead. In the midst of the chaos, Bob Briscoe tried to escape by smashing a rear window, but Dunham was faster. He shot Briscoe straight through the heart, killing him on the spot. Weakened from blood loss, McGlinchey made a final attempt to reach the house. As he ran out of the cabin, James easily caught up. He stood behind the colonel, aimed his pistol, and fired. McGlinchey collapsed face first onto the dirt path. Without hesitation, James shot him twice more in the head, executing him coldly. The neighbor who had rushed over to the McGlinchey farm saw the whole thing go down, but he made sure to stay hidden. He wasn't armed and didn't want to get caught by James, so he carefully watched the final 2 murders unfold from a safe distance. As the chaos continued, he made the choice not to get involved. Instead, he ran back home, his heart racing, and told his father everything he had witnessed. Now, if you're wondering where's George, the driver who had taken Jimmy and the colonel to the meeting, here's where he was. After the colonel told him to take care of the horses before bed, George heard the gunshots and knew something was wrong. Fearing for his life, he decided the best thing to do was hide out in the barn, away from the madness. However, James knew that George was hiding nearby the entire time. After killing the colonel, he shouted toward the barn, demanding that George come out. He was determined to find him, knowing George could be a witness to the massacre. James searched everywhere, through the house, the cabin where the colonel and Briscoe had spent their last hours, and even the barn. He got so close to George that the poor man was sure his end was near. But by some stroke of luck, James didn't find him. James must have thought George had somehow escaped or maybe called for help because, in the end, he chose a buckskin horse that had belonged to Jimmy Wells and rode off into the night. In his rush, he didn't even bother with a saddle. Meanwhile, as the neighbor made his way back to McGlinchey's farm, he bumped into George. The frightened driver told him that James had ridden off just a few minutes ago. The neighbor asked George if he had seen anyone else from the family, but George shook his head. He hadn't checked the house either. He was too scared to. After talking it over, the two decided to team up and figure out what had happened. Their first stop was outside, where Colonel McGlinchey's body still lay. They confirmed the worst. He was gone. With heavy hearts, they turned to the house. It was dark, quiet, and felt completely lifeless. Entering through a side door into the rear parlor, they were immediately hit by a sharp burning smell. That's when they saw Jimmy Wells on the floor. His face and upper body were badly burned, and his shirt collar, made of flammable celluloid, had caught fire from the gunshot that killed him. From there, they cautiously made their way into the dining room, which was a disaster zone of shattered plates and dishes. Bloody footprints trailed into a nearby bedroom, and when they followed, the sight was horrifying. Mrs. McGlinchey's body lay in a bloody mess, with splatters covering the walls, floor, and even the ceiling. The downstairs search turned up nothing else, so the two climbed the stairs to check the second floor. Across the staircase, they found Minnie, lifeless in her room. But there was still no sign of Hattie or the baby. Frantically, they looked under beds and inside closets, but the two were nowhere to be found. Then, they heard the sound of a horse and buggy approaching. Word about the killings had started to spread, and neighbors were beginning to arrive. Around 1 a.m. on May 27th, someone found Robert, Bob Briscoe's body, out in the field behind the cabin. But Hattie and the baby? Still missing. The searchers couldn't help but wonder if Hattie might have played a role in the tragedy and escaped with her husband. But those suspicions were quickly silenced by the faint, heart-wrenching cry of a baby coming from upstairs. Following the sound, they made their way to the room where Minnie had been discovered earlier. There, under a pile of linens on the bed, they found the infant, helpless and crying, lying next to his mother's lifeless body. Beside Hattie's bed, there was a handwritten note that read, "Please say goodbye for me to my dear mother, brother, and stepfather." At first it seemed like Hattie had a little time to prepare for her tragic end. But soon people started wondering if James Dunham had actually written it. Some suspected that he might not have planned to kill everyone at first. Maybe it was the brutal murder of the maid that pushed him over the edge. and from there his bloodlust spiraled out of control. Then there was little Percy Dunham, the only survivor of that horrific night. After everything was over, Percy was taken in by neighbors, and eventually he was adopted by his maternal grandparents, Harriet and Michael Brewer. As for the funerals of the victims, the first to be laid to rest was Minnie Schlieser, just 28 years old. Her funeral took place on May 28, less than 48 hours after her death. She was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in an unmarked grave in Section P. What was meant to be a small, private gathering quickly turned into something bigger as word spread, and many from the community showed up to pay their respects. The funeral for the rest of the McGlindsey-Wells family was held the very next day, on May 29th. The family was buried together in a plot at Oak Hill Cemetery, right next to Oscar Wells and Robert Briscoe. Each of the 5 headstones, all except Oscar's, carried a part of the Romans verse, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Now, as for James, a lot went down after he took off. On Thursday, May 28, 2 locals, Oscar Parker and Everett Snell, were out in the foothills of Mount Hamilton, near Smith's Creek Hotel, when they came across a stranger. He was riding a horse that wasn't saddled or bridled, just like the one stolen from the McGlindsey ranch. According to them, the rider had a scratched face, torn clothes, and gunny sacks on his feet. By this time, Parker and Snell had already heard about the Orchard City massacre and knew exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. As they got closer, the stranger tried to pull his hat down to cover his face, but it didn't work. They both recognized him instantly. James Dunham. Snell, who had worked with James a few years earlier, knew for sure it was him. The coldness in his eyes and the deep scratches on his face, probably from Hattie fighting back before he killed her, made it clear this was the man they'd been hearing about. Even though Parker and Snell were tough and used to hard situations, they couldn't help but feel the weight of what had happened. Still, they kept their cool and didn't let on that they knew who he was. The stranger seemed nervous but kept talking. He told them he hadn't eaten in days and had broken into Snell's cabin for food. Parker, seeing how worn out he looked, offered him a place to stay for the night. But the stranger got even more anxious and turned it down. He claimed he had to get to a nearby valley before nightfall and asked for directions. Parker, being clever, told him to stick to the main trail, mentioning that there were bandits in the hills. But that was a trick to keep him on the open path, where it would be easier for them to track him later. After that, they parted ways. Once the stranger was out of sight, Parker and Snell headed to Smith's Creek Hotel, where they called the sheriff's office. The sheriff didn't waste any time. He quickly gathered his men, brought along 2 bloodhounds, and headed straight for the location. But as soon as they arrived, a thick fog rolled in, making it nearly impossible to search for James at that moment. However, the next morning, as soon as the fog cleared, they were ready to go, and by the end of the day, they had found something big. The horse that belonged to Jimmy Wells, the same one that James Dunham had stolen from the McGlindsey family. Along with the horse, they found pieces of Dunham's clothing and signs of recent campfires. But then something strange happened. While they were out searching, they suddenly heard a gunshot. The source of the shot was a mystery, and no one could figure out who fired it or where it came from. Some people thought it might have been a hunter from the other side of the mountain, but other investigators believed that James could have taken his own life. Still, since his body was never found, that theory couldn't be confirmed. The very next day, on May 30th, evidence surfaced showing that James had broken into a cabin near Mount Hamilton, proving that he was still alive at that time. By June 1st, word spread that James Dunham had bought supplies, reigniting the manhunt. Not long after, a rifle and pistol were reported stolen from a cabin in Glenwood. This led investigators to believe Dunham had managed to slip away from Mount Hamilton and was heading south. On June 2nd, the sheriff's posse jumped onto a train bound for Hollister after hearing that Dunham might be moving under the cover of darkness toward Kiansaba Valley. They suspected he was seeking help from Mexican communities that weren't aware of his horrific crimes. On June 4th, a man at Hayes Station gave an eerily accurate description of Dunham's clothing, shoes, and hat, without even being asked. This added weight to the theory that Dunham was trying to hide out in Tulare County. A rancher in Merced claimed he had shared a meal with Dunham, but this lead turned out to be another dead end. By June 7th, the search was losing steam. Some doubted Dunham had even made it as far as Fresno County. Adding to the mystery, rumors swirled that he might have ditched his horse for a bicycle to make his getaway. Dunham was known as a skilled long-distance cyclist, and it seemed like a smart move to avoid drawing attention. One sighting placed a man matching his description arriving in Bakersfield on a bike as early as May 29th. It's worth pointing out that James Dunham seemed to have been planning his escape well in advance. Just one day before the murders, on Monday, May 25th, he withdrew his entire life savings, around $1,000, from the bank. The next day, he stashed a bicycle in the brush near a dry creek bed, only a few hundred yards from the house. This makes the theory that he used a bicycle to flee not far-fetched at all. In fact, it seems like Dunham had carefully thought through his getaway, choosing the bike as a quieter and less conspicuous means of escape compared to a horse. By this point, the search for James Dunham was falling apart. Every lead seemed to hit a wall, and people were left with one burning question. Why did he do it? On June 1st, nearly a week after the murders, Ada's will was made public, and it sent shockwaves through the investigation. Just 80 days before her death, she had written that none of her assets would go to her husband, Colonel R. P. McGlindsey. Instead, her entire fortune, worth over $335,000, was left to her son, James Wells. Her daughter Hattie received just $100. This revelation gave investigators a chilling theory. What if Dunham murdered the family to ensure his son would inherit everything? With the family gone, Ada's estate would pass to her grandson, making Dunham the trustee in charge of the money. This painted a picture not of a man who acted in a fit of rage, but of someone who meticulously planned the brutal murders out of pure greed. Still, one big question lingered. How did Dunham plan to get away with it? As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the trail grew colder. The manhunt that had once united entire communities started to lose steam. A year later, even the most dedicated trackers were forced to admit defeat. Despite this, reports of sightings kept trickling in, each one adding to the growing mystery. Some claimed Dunham was spotted in Texas, Wyoming, or Massachusetts. Others said he had escaped as far as China. One theory suggested he fled to Cuba on a steamboat, while others believed he had died in the mountains. Every tip seemed promising at first, but each one ended the same way, a dead end. As time went on, it felt like James Dunham had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but questions and a legacy of horror. Interestingly, several men were accused of being the fugitive over the years. In early June, just weeks after the murders, a man near San Miguel asked for food, and some believed he was Dunham. But after further investigation, it turned out he was just another outlaw with no connection to the crime. A year later, in 1897, authorities arrested a man in Mexico who fit a loose description of Dunham. However, he was quickly cleared when closer examination proved he wasn't the killer. Then in 1901, a man named Charles Franklin Krill found himself at the center of the manhunt. Arrested in Wichita, Kansas, he was transported to San Jose, where he was charged with being Dunham. Krill shared some physical traits with the fugitive, including height, weight, and even scars, but the evidence against him didn't hold up. After weeks of being questioned, Krill was finally released, though the experience left him shaken. Interestingly, Krill later cashed in on his ordeal by selling tickets to people curious about his close call with the gallows. The years didn't slow down the string of sightings and arrests. In 1902, rumors swirled that Dunham was living among the Navajo. By 1904, another dramatic moment unfolded in Arizona. After a shootout, a man confessed on his deathbed to being Dunham. Authorities were hopeful, but once again, this lead proved to be false. In 1908, yet another man, this time from Texas, was accused of being Dunham. William Hatfield was brought all the way to San Jose for a hearing, but after a brief investigation, he too was released. As time passed and the sightings dwindled, many people began to believe Dunham was no longer alive. Some speculated that he had taken his own life shortly after the massacre, possibly in the mountains where he was last seen. This theory gained traction when skeletal remains began turning up in the following years. In 1898, just 2 years after the murders, bones were discovered and examined to see if they belonged to Dunham. Over the next 4 decades, more sets of remains were uncovered, including some in the Pacheco Pass area, but none could be definitively linked to him. One strange twist involved a set of bones that disappeared entirely, possibly stolen by someone hoping to claim the reward money. Even so, the mystery persisted, with every discovery reigniting the hope that justice might finally be served. As if the story wasn't already tangled enough, alternative theories emerged. Some believed Dunham hadn't committed the murders at all. Instead, they argued that he had been killed himself and framed to divert attention from the real culprits. While intriguing, these ideas lacked credible evidence and were largely dismissed. For over 100 years, the story of James Dunham has stayed a big mystery. Did he die alone in the wilderness, lost and forgotten? Or did he escape, living a new life under a different name? We may never know the truth, but one thing is certain. The horror of that night left a lasting mark, especially on the only survivor, Percy Osborne Dunham. Percy, just a baby when it all happened, grew up far away from the dark shadow of his family's past. To protect him, he was renamed Percy Brewer and raised by his grandmother. Despite his tragic beginnings, Percy went on to live an incredible life. He became a pilot, served in both world wars, and retired as a colonel. But no matter how far he went, the weight of his family's past likely followed. Case 7. On a chilly December night in 2016, the peace of a quiet Toronto neighborhood was shattered by the sound of a woman's screams that suddenly stopped as quickly as they began. Inside the house, 3 kids were asleep, completely unaware of the terrible events unfolding just a few rooms away. By the next morning, 40-year-old Dr. Elena Frick, a well-loved doctor and mother of 3, had disappeared. Her husband, Dr. Mohammed Shamji, claimed she had left the house with a suitcase and another man. But what seemed like a simple explanation was hiding something far darker. What really happened to Elena that night, and how did her perfect life take such a tragic turn? Elena Frick was born in 1977 in Windsor, Canada, to Joseph and Anna Frick. She had an older sister named Caroline. Her parents were originally from Croatia and had moved to Canada in the 1960s to work for General Motors. After Caroline's birth in 1970, the Fricks faced heartbreak, losing 2 pregnancies and being told by doctors they wouldn't be able to have more children. Against all odds, Elena was born in 1977, and her parents saw her as nothing short of a miracle. When Elena was young, the family relocated from Windsor to Tecumseh, a small town in southwestern Ontario, where she grew up. Known as a bright and curious child, Elena spent much of her free time immersed in books. She attended St. Peter's Elementary School and later Santa Ana High School. In high school, she participated in Croatian folk dance and spent her summers working in nearby cornfields. Elena was also athletic, joining her school's track and field team. During her school years, Elena met a boy named Matthew Renault, and the two quickly became inseparable. They shared everything, from meals with each other's families to a deep love for music. In the 1990s, they fulfilled a shared dream of attending a Nirvana concert, their favorite band. Their bond seemed unshakable, and friends and family believed they were destined to marry. However, life took a turn after high school, when Alana began studying medicine at the University of Ottawa, while Matthew stayed in their hometown. The long-distance relationship proved challenging, and despite their engagement, Elena eventually ended it, focusing entirely on her studies. Elena's drive to succeed stemmed from witnessing her parents' grueling work at the General Motors factory. She often remarked on how exhausting their jobs were, and resolved to secure a career that offered financial stability and a better quality of life. Her determination paid off, and she excelled during her time at medical school. In 2003, while working as a resident at the Ottawa Hospital, Elena was playing pool in the recreation room when she caught the eye of Mohammed Shamji, a neurosurgery resident. Mohammed, the son of renowned thoracic surgeon Dr. Farid Shamji, came from a wealthy and prestigious family in Ottawa. He had attended the country's best schools and was considered a medical prodigy. Mohammed began joining Elena for games of pool and eventually asked her out. Elena was captivated by his intelligence, ambition, and elite background. Despite her growing feelings, she sometimes doubted whether she was good enough for him. Their relationship, however, was far from perfect. While Elena was deeply invested, Mohammed's behavior often left her disappointed. He skipped her medical school graduation under the pretense of being ill, only for her to later discover he had been out with friends. He was also unfaithful, seeing another woman from his university days. Despite these red flags, Mohammed's charm and persistence convinced Elena to stay with him, even after she had tried ending the relationship twice. In April 2004, Elena introduced Mohammed to her parents. Joseph and Anna were unimpressed, finding him distant and disinterested in engaging with them. Joseph advised Elena not to settle for someone like Mohammed, believing she deserved better. One morning, Anna overheard the couple arguing. When she asked what was wrong, Elena, visibly upset, insisted it was nothing more than a sleepless night. Anna left them alone, assuming it was just a harmless disagreement. Not long after, Elena discovered she was pregnant. Mohammed faced a dilemma, as his Muslim parents would be furious about an out-of-wedlock child and his choice to marry outside their faith. Weighing his options, Mohammed decided marriage was the best solution. Together, he and Elena began planning 2 weddings, one to honor his family's traditions and another for hers. On September 1st, 2004, Elena and Mohammed held a traditional Muslim ceremony in Ottawa. At nearly 5 months pregnant, Elena adhered to the customs, including having her hands adorned with intricate henna designs, which her Christian mother found unsettling. The wedding highlighted the stark contrast between the couple's backgrounds. Elena's guests were primarily hard-working relatives, while Mohammed's were prominent figures in the medical community. Alcohol was officially forbidden at the ceremony, though some guests discreetly drank in the parking lot. While their union seemed like a compromise between their different worlds, the complexities of their relationship hinted at the challenges that lay ahead. Before their second wedding at a Catholic church, Elena and Mohammed were required to attend several counseling sessions. Mohammed, however, refused to participate and asked John Mark, a mutual friend, to attend in his place. When John declined, the sessions were skipped entirely. Despite Mohammed's indifference and lack of effort, the couple proceeded with a small wedding ceremony at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor. Unlike their first wedding, this one was modest, with fewer guests. To hide the lingering henna tattoos on her hands, Elena wore elbow-length white gloves. After the ceremony, the couple rode in a limousine to the Caesars Hotel and Casino, where they spent part of their honeymoon. Shortly after, they purchased a home in Ottawa and moved there. Elena began working as a family doctor at the Ottawa Hospital, while Mohammed continued his residency in neurosurgery. In January 2005, after a challenging pregnancy, Elena gave birth to a baby girl. She was overjoyed by the arrival of her daughter, but Mohammed appeared detached and uninvolved. His focus remained on his career, often retreating to the upstairs study as soon as he returned home, barely interacting with his wife or child. Tensions grew when Mohammed's family visited shortly after the baby's birth. Elena, upstairs breastfeeding, didn't come down to greet them, which enraged Mohammed. Later, he berated her, claiming it was her duty to welcome guests at the door as a sign of respect. Feeling increasingly isolated, Elena confided in her parents, saying she felt as if she were walking on eggshells in her own home. Over time, Mohammed's controlling behavior escalated, and he began having unprovoked fits of anger. While Elena rarely spoke about her struggles, friends and family noticed her growing unhappiness. Mohammed also criticized her appearance, ridiculing her weight gain and belittling her cooking. A month after the baby's birth, tensions reached a breaking point when Mohammed, in a panic, called Elena's parents, claiming she wanted a divorce. Elena quickly took the phone from him, assured her parents that everything was fine, and ended the call. Not long after, while her parents were preparing to attend church one Sunday, they received a missed call from Elena's home. Using their phone's redial feature, they called back, only to overhear a heated argument. Mohammed's furious insults toward Elena echoed through the line, leaving her parents horrified. In the spring of 2005, Mohammed was accepted into a prestigious PhD program in biomedical engineering at Duke University in North Carolina. Seeing this as an opportunity, Elena enrolled in Duke's master's program in public policy, and the couple planned to move to the United States that fall. However, just days before the move, an argument turned violent, and Mohammed physically assaulted Elena. Terrified, she took her daughter and sought refuge at a friend's apartment. Mohammed, unaware of her location, began calling mutual friends until he eventually found her. After 3 days, he promised to stay with his parents if she returned home. Still afraid, Elena agreed, but asked John Mark to stay nearby for protection until her own parents could arrive. Following the incident, Mohammed faced 3 criminal charges, 1 for assaulting Elena and 2 for issuing threats. These charges jeopardized both his career and his ability to cross the U.S. border to begin his studies at Duke. To salvage his future, Mohammed worked to reconcile with Elena. A few weeks later, the family baptized their daughter in a church in Windsor. When guests at the reception asked why Mohammed wasn't there, Elena told them he was working, but privately admitted to her cousin Rob that they'd had another fight. Rob urged her to leave Mohammed, assuring her she could find someone who truly loved her. Elena, however, insisted they would work things out. On July 27, 2005, the authorities agreed to drop the charges against Mohammed if he signed a peace bond. As part of the agreement, he had to acknowledge that Elena had reasonable grounds to fear him and accept a 12-month probation. With the charges dismissed just in time, Mohammed was able to begin his PhD at Duke and cross the border without issue. He moved to Durham, North Carolina, to start his program, and Elena and their daughter joined him a few months later. Friends and family couldn't understand why Elena returned to Mohammed. She was intelligent, financially independent, and had the unwavering support of her family. While some speculated that she was drawn to the status her relationship with Mohammed provided, others believed she truly loved him and held on to hope that their relationship could improve. In Durham, the couple settled into a routine. They began running marathons together, often waking up before dawn to train. Afterward, Elena would drop their daughter off at daycare before heading to Duke University with Mohammed. Mohammed excelled in his program, completing his 5-year PhD in just 3.5 years. Despite his professional success, the cracks in their marriage remained, hinting at deeper challenges that could not be resolved by a change in location. Elena excelled during her studies at Duke University, earning a rare scholarship that covered most of her tuition and being recognized as the best in her class. After her classes, she would pick up Mohammed and their baby before heading home to prepare dinner, a routine she repeated almost daily. In 2007, nearly 2 years later, Elena became pregnant again and gave birth to the couple's second daughter in November. Friends of the couple noticed an imbalance in their marriage. Elena was the one who drove Mohammed everywhere he needed to go. When her friend Valentina Nikolova asked her about it, Elena simply explained that Mohammed disliked driving, but the imbalance extended beyond transportation. Elena was responsible for nearly everything in their household, from grocery shopping to assembling furniture and even changing light bulbs. Despite her efforts, Elena often downplayed her own importance, frequently telling friends how brilliant Mohammed was and how insignificant she felt in comparison. To outsiders, Elena appeared to hold control in the relationship. Yet, she always sought Mohammed's permission for even the smallest decisions, displaying an unusual submissiveness. Meanwhile, Mohammed would call her multiple times whenever she was out, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. In 2009, after completing their studies at Duke, the couple returned to Ottawa, Canada, and moved into a house near the hospital where they both began working. Elena quickly became a beloved family doctor, admired by her patients, while Mohammed advanced in his neurosurgery specialization, earning an award for the exceptional care he provided. Around this time, the couple became active on social media, portraying themselves as a wealthy, happy family with beautiful children. However, close friends knew that Mohammed controlled Elena's accounts, dictating which photos she could post, and even pressuring her to harass people he didn't like. Mohammed's controlling nature extended beyond social media and into their daily lives. He denied Elena permission to subscribe to her favorite newspaper and restricted who their daughters could play with, dismissing children from less affluent families. He often insulted Elena, calling her useless and stupid, and claimed he would have been better off without her. In 2011, Mohammed moved to Calgary for a year to complete a spinal surgery fellowship. Shortly after, Elena discovered he was having an affair. She found emails confirming the relationship and noticed a credit card charge for a hotel stay with his mistress on Mother's Day. When confronted, Mohammed didn't deny the infidelity. Devastated, Elena considered leaving him, encouraged by friends who believed she deserved better. Yet she stayed. Elena yearned for his approval, believed she had invested too much in their life together, and hoped to prove she was worthy of his love. Mohammed promised to end the affair, and shortly after, he secured his dream job as a neurosurgeon at Toronto Western Hospital. The couple relocated to Toronto, purchasing a $1.5 million home in North York. Elena left her job in Ottawa and eventually found a position at the Earl Bales Clinic. However, she admitted to friends that the new job didn't excite her. She had worked hard to gain knowledge and felt her skills were underutilized. Once settled, Mohammed suggested having another child, noting they had an empty room in their home and expressing his desire for a son. Elena agreed, hoping a new baby would breathe life into their strained marriage. In October 2013, the couple welcomed a baby boy. For nearly 2 years after his birth, their relationship seemed to stabilize. During this time, Elena grew close to her new boss, Allison Kaufman, who lived across the street from their home. Their daughters thrived in private school, and Mohammed gained a reputation at Toronto Western Hospital for performing miraculous surgeries. In 2015, Alana left her clinic job to work at Scarborough Hospital's Family Medicine Unit and became a district delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. Though her career was flourishing, Mohammed resented her success, reigniting tensions in their marriage. In March 2016, the family traveled to Vermont, stopping in Ottawa first to leave their youngest son with Mohammed's parents. That evening, Mohammed called Alana's parents, claiming she had severely cut her right palm and was undergoing surgery. Alana later provided conflicting explanations for her injury, including hitting a glass on the counter, cutting vegetables, and breaking a dish while washing. None of her stories seemed plausible, and it was clear her wound wasn't accidental. In Vermont, tensions escalated further. The couple argued about Mohammed's affair in Calgary, during which he cruelly compared Alana to his former mistress, claiming the other woman was far superior. The argument turned violent when Mohammed attempted to strangle Alana. Later, Alana confided in friends about the incident, but chose not to report it, fearing how U.S. authorities might handle a man named Mohammed. A few months later, the couple celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, which would ultimately be their last. Alana gave Mohammed a heartfelt card that read, "My dearest Mohammed, I love you with all my heart. 12 years, 3 kids, for cities, 2 countries, and a lifetime of memories. I can't wait for the next 50 years." But the truth was far darker than her words suggested. By late 2016, Alana had started discussing divorce with Mohammed. Panicked, he begged her to reconsider, and though she agreed to think it over, her suspicions grew that he was involved with another woman. When Alana confided her suspicions to her friends, one jokingly suggested that she should get a lover herself. Surprisingly, Alana did just that. She met another doctor who was also married with children. He treated her with kindness and made her feel desired again. Alana later told a friend it was the first time she'd experienced a shred of happiness since marrying Mohammed. Her lover encouraged her to leave Mohammed and imagine a life without him. Emboldened, Alana consulted a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. She revealed something she hadn't told anyone else, that Mohammed had assaulted her violently in October. It was the final straw for Alana, who decided she needed to leave, not just for herself, but for the safety of her children. By late November, Alana officially filed for divorce. Mohammed attempted to win her back by gifting her a large box of chocolates, but she remained resolute. On November 24th, she sent an email to a friend, apologizing for her recent absence. "I'm in the process of separating from my husband, and things at home are chaotic. I'll try to catch up with you this weekend. I'll be away at a conference." Alana attended the conference that Friday, where she spoke on panels, networked, and socialized. Mohammed messaged her throughout the weekend, feigning the role of a supportive husband. Upon returning home Sunday night, Alana told her close friends that she had served Mohammed with divorce papers. Her lawyer had contacted him on Monday, emphasizing Alana's desire for an amicable and swift resolution and requesting full financial disclosure. Alana moved into the basement of their home, but Mohammed repeatedly moved her belongings back into the master bedroom. On December 1st, 2016, Alana's family tried unsuccessfully to reach her throughout the day. Worried, they called Mohammed, who hesitantly claimed that Alana had left the house the night before with a suitcase and her boyfriend. Alana's mother, knowing her daughter would never abandon her children, contacted Allison Kaufman, Alana's former boss and neighbor, asking her to check the house. Allison peered into the garage and saw that Alana's car was still parked there. She informed Alana's parents, who immediately called the police and set out on an overnight drive from Windsor to Toronto. When officers arrived at the house, Mohammed repeated his story about Alana leaving with a suitcase. Following protocol, they searched the residence for any signs of her, but found nothing. Later that day, police discovered a woman's body stuffed inside a suitcase near the Humber River. She was barefoot, dressed in pajamas, and had severe head injuries. The autopsy revealed she had been beaten, sustaining blunt force trauma, before being strangled. The body was taken to Alana's parents for identification. While Alana's mother, Anna, couldn't recognize her daughter due to the swelling and damage to her face, her father, Joseph, tearfully confirmed her identity. "This is my daughter." The investigation quickly pointed to Mohammed Shamji as the sole suspect. He was arrested the next day at a cafe, where undercover officers handcuffed him at his table. Police discovered that Alana had attempted to call 911 on the night of her murder, but only managed to dial 611 before Mohammed stopped her. It was also revealed that he killed her while their 3 children were in the house. Their eldest daughter later recounted hearing her mother's screams from her room. Fearing an intruder, she crept to her parents' bedroom and saw her father lying face down on the bed. When he noticed her, he ordered her back to her room. The crime shocked Canada, garnering widespread media attention. The seemingly perfect marriage of two accomplished doctors had ended in unimaginable tragedy. Ilana's funeral was held on December 17, 2016, at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor, the same church where she had been baptized and married the man who would eventually take her life. While awaiting Mohammed's trial, Joseph and Anna Frick moved into their daughter's home to care for their grandchildren, ensuring they could remain in their school during such a difficult time. In May 2019, over 2 years after the crime, Mohammed Shamji pleaded guilty as part of a deal with prosecutors avoiding a full trial. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. The case received extensive media coverage, and millions of Canadians followed the sentencing. Ilana's eldest daughter publicly stated that she hated her father for what he had done and doubted she could ever forgive him. Today, Ilana's children live with their maternal grandparents in Windsor. They frequently talk about their mother, but refuse to mention their father's name. Case 8. It was just another evening, cars lined up at a red light, people heading home. Jane was sitting in her car, waiting for the light to change, when something strange caught her attention. From the car next to hers, she heard terrified screams. Someone was begging for help. Then she saw it, a hand, small and frantic, banging against the backseat window. The driver, a man with a cold, blank stare, kept his eyes forward, gripping the wheel. But when he noticed Jane looking, he suddenly sped off, zigzagging through traffic until he was gone. Shaken, Jane grabbed her phone and called 911. She had no idea that what she had just witnessed was part of something much bigger, a horrifying crime that could have been stopped that very night. This is the tragic case of Denise Amber Lee. Denise Amber Lee grew up in Charlotte County, where she was raised in a loving household by her parents. From an early age, Denise cherished her family, showing her affection through small but meaningful acts of kindness. Though naturally shy, she had a warm personality and dreamed of finding her soulmate and starting a family of her own. In 2004, while attending high school, Denise met Nathan Lee. He was outgoing, popular, and athletic, often surrounded by friends, while Denise was quiet, studious, and known for her intelligence. She excelled in mathematics and spent hours immersed in books, earning a reputation as a bookworm. Despite their differences, Denise found herself drawn to Nathan, and one day, she bravely initiated a conversation with him. To her surprise, they quickly connected, and soon after, she invited him on a date. Their relationship blossomed, and just 3 weeks after their first date, they celebrated Valentine's Day together. Nathan gifted Denise a small heart-shaped ring worth $40, a symbol of their budding romance that she treasured deeply. Despite their contrasting personalities, they complemented each other perfectly. Their love grew quickly, and Nathan knew Denise was the one. In August 2005, they married, ready to build a life together. By 2006, Denise was pregnant with their first child, Noah, and a year later, they welcomed their second son, Adam. Denise embraced motherhood with devotion, choosing to stay home to care for her children, while Nathan worked multiple jobs to support their growing family. Despite financial struggles, their home was filled with love and hope. As their family expanded, they moved to a larger rental home in Northport, Florida, in late 2007. The neighborhood was still developing, but it offered the safety and comfort they desired. While Denise's father was initially hesitant about them moving farther away, he understood their need for a better living space. January 17, 2008 began like any other day for the Lee family. Nathan left for work while Denise stayed home with the boys. They remained in regular contact, and around 11 a.m., they spoke on the phone. Denise mentioned that she was giving one of the children a haircut, and since the night, Nathan suggested she turn off the air conditioning to save money and open the windows instead. She agreed, saying she had already done so. However, later that afternoon, when Nathan tried calling her again, she didn't answer. Growing increasingly concerned, he made multiple attempts to reach her during his 25-minute drive home. By the time he arrived at the house around 3 p.m., an unsettling scene awaited him. Denise's phone, purse, and keys were left on the table. The windows were closed, contradicting what she had told him earlier. Most disturbing of all, both children were in the same crib, something Denise never did. She was nowhere to be found. Nathan instantly knew something was terribly wrong. Denise would never leave their children alone. At 3:25 p.m., he called 911 to report her disappearance. This was the first emergency call related to her case. He then contacted his father-in-law, Rick, a seasoned sergeant with over 25 years of experience in law enforcement. Rick, aware of how missing persons cases were often dismissed initially, also knew that suspicion would likely fall on Nathan first. Determined to act swiftly, he used his influence to mobilize local officers. Within minutes, law enforcement officers from the county were deployed. By 4 p.m., they arrived at the Lee residence to investigate. A thorough inspection of the house revealed no signs of forced entry, no struggle, and no missing valuables, ruling out robbery. The lack of immediate clues left investigators puzzled. Their next step was to question the neighbors, hoping someone had seen or heard something unusual. Each person was asked to carefully go over their memories of that day and recount every little detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed. Investigators were desperate for any information that could help them unravel this strange case. That's when Jennifer Eckert, who was staying with relatives next door to the Lee family, stepped forward. She recalled that around 2 p.m., she had noticed a white man driving a dark green Camaro circling the neighborhood. After a few rounds, he finally pulled into Denise's driveway. Jennifer found this behavior suspicious, so before heading back inside, she made sure to get a good look at the man's face. About 10 minutes later, she stepped back out onto the porch and saw him leaving. However, she couldn't tell if anyone else was in the car with him. This observation proved crucial for detectives. They quickly relayed the information to their colleagues at the sheriff's office, providing a detailed description of the driver. Within hours, an alert was issued to law agencies in the area. Meanwhile, Denise was nowhere to be found. Her husband was overwhelmed with despair, feeling completely lost. Their children were too young to comprehend the gravity of the situation or the devastating impact it would have on their future. In desperation, he reached out to as many people as he could, pleading for help in the search for Denise. He even contacted journalists, hoping the media could amplify the case's visibility. And it worked. The story quickly gained traction, drawing attention from news outlets that had no idea just how far-reaching its impact would be. Then at 6:14 p.m., the emergency dispatch center received an unexpected call. A woman was on the phone for nearly 5 minutes, but instead of directly addressing the operator, she seemed to be speaking to someone else, begging them to take her home, pleading to be reunited with her family. At one point, she did ask the dispatcher for help, but most of her words were directed at the person holding her captive. The operator struggled to make sense of the call, but one critical detail finally connected it to Denise's disappearance. The woman managed to say that she had been taken against her will by a man she didn't know. Before the line abruptly cut off, she also provided one last crucial piece of information: the make of the car she was in. This detail confirmed the lead investigators had received earlier that day. Despite Denise's bravery and her desperate attempt to be saved, authorities couldn't track her location. The phone she had used belonged to her abductor, and it was a disposable device with no GPS capabilities. However, further investigation led them to a name: Michael Lee King. Michael, a 36-year-old man, lived just a short distance from Denise and her family. Born on May 4, 1971, he had spent most of his life in Michigan. As an adult, he married and had a child, but his marriage was troubled and ended in a bitter divorce. In 2002, he packed up and moved to Florida, where he worked as a plumber, until one day he simply quit for no apparent reason. From that point on, Michael struggled to hold down a job. Reports surfaced that he had been fired multiple times due to inappropriate behavior, particularly toward women. One disturbing incident involved him exposing himself to a woman who was breastfeeding her baby. She never reported it to the police. Those who knew Michael described him as an odd and troublesome individual. He frequented nudist clubs and often clashed with his neighbors due to his erratic actions. Some speculated that his behavior was linked to an intellectual disability. He had a significantly low IQ, and it was believed that a childhood accident, where he suffered a serious head injury while riding a sled, had contributed to his cognitive struggles. By 2007, Michael's life was unraveling. He had declared bankruptcy, was unemployed, and his home was on the brink of foreclosure. And now, Denise's life was in his hands. At 6:23 p.m., just 9 minutes after Denise's call and 3 hours after her disappearance was reported, Sarasota County authorities received another tip. This time, it came from a 17-year-old girl named Sabrina. She was the daughter of Harold, Michael's cousin. Sabrina, clearly shaken, told authorities she had overheard her father discussing something alarming. She insisted that her identity remain confidential. According to her, at around 6 p.m., her uncle Michael had shown up at Harold's house unexpectedly. He had asked to borrow a shovel, a gas can, and a flashlight. Sabrina also saw something that made her blood run cold. As Michael was about to leave, a woman suddenly emerged from his car, attempting to escape. But before she could get far, Michael grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back inside the vehicle. Alarmed, Harold questioned what was going on. Michael brushed it off, saying it was just a fight between him and his partner and that there was nothing to worry about. He told Harold to stay out of it. Terrified but determined to help, Sabrina provided investigators with the exact location of her uncle's house, hoping they could intervene before it was too late. By this point, law enforcement had gathered a significant amount of information about Michael Lee King, far beyond just his name. As more leads regarding Denise's whereabouts surfaced, a crucial call came in. Shortly after Sabrina's report, at 6:30 p.m., Jane dialed 911 from her car. She recounted a chilling experience. While waiting at a traffic light, she heard terrifying screams coming from a nearby vehicle. The voice sounded young and desperate, repeatedly pleading for help. Jane managed to catch a glimpse of the driver and relayed his description to the dispatcher. She also noted that the car was a dark green Camaro. As the vehicles momentarily lined up side by side, she saw a hand frantically pounding against the passenger side window. Alarmed, Jane decided to follow the car. She stayed behind long enough to note the license plate, but it soon became clear that the driver had noticed her. In an attempt to shake her off, he began weaving erratically through traffic. Then, without warning, he made a sharp left turn, disappearing from sight. At that moment, Jane unknowingly crossed into Charlotte County, triggering a transfer of her emergency call to the local police there. What followed was a devastating misstep. Law enforcement agencies in Sarasota and Charlotte counties failed to communicate with each other. As a result, officers in Charlotte had no idea about Denise's abduction and weren't actively searching for her. Later that night, at 9:16 p.m. on January 17th, an officer on patrol spotted a green Camaro and immediately pulled it over. The driver was none other than Michael Lee King. Despite repeated orders to exit the vehicle, he refused until the officer warned that force would be used. When he finally stepped out, his appearance raised immediate suspicions. His jeans were soaked from the waist down, and his shoes were caked in mud. A quick search of the car revealed unsettling items. A powerless cell phone in his pocket, a muddy shovel in the back seat, and a gas can. Yet, there was no sign of Denise. Michael was arrested on the spot, and forensic experts combed through the vehicle for evidence. Their findings painted a grim picture. Bloodstains, strands of hair ripped from the root, and a partial handprint pointed to a struggle. But it was one small object that removed any doubt. Denise's cherished heart-shaped ring, a gift from her husband on Valentine's Day, was found inside the car. She never took it off. The evidence was overwhelming, but Michael had his own version of events. During his interrogation, he spun a bizarre story, claiming he had been in a consensual relationship with Denise. According to him, they had been kidnapped together by masked gunmen who later took her away. He insisted he had no idea where she was. On January 19, 2008, the search for Denise came to a heartbreaking end. Authorities discovered her body, buried in a shallow grave, stripped of clothing. The devastating news crushed her family, who had clung to the hope that she was still alive. An autopsy confirmed their worst fears. Denise had been sexually assaulted and shot in the forehead, killing her instantly. Investigators also found her underwear nearby, containing traces of DNA that, when tested, matched Michael Lee King. The burning question remained. Why? Why did Michael choose Denise? They had no known connection, no prior encounters. What drove him to abduct her from her home, brutalize her, and end her life so violently? Prosecutors later pieced together what they believed had happened that morning. They argued that Michael had been lurking through the neighborhood, hunting for a target to satisfy his depraved urges. When he spotted Denise through her window, he saw an opportunity. Armed with a gun, he forced his way inside and threatened her. Initially, she resisted, but then he issued the ultimate threat, her children. If she didn't comply, he would harm them. Faced with an impossible choice, Denise sacrificed herself to protect them. On January 23rd, Denise was laid to rest in what became the largest funeral the city had ever seen. The procession was marked by a moving tribute. Fire trucks lined the streets with their lights flashing, and uniformed officers saluted as the hearse passed by. Rose petals were scattered along the route in her honor. Michael King stood trial on August 24, 2009. Predictably, he maintained his innocence. The prosecution, however, presented a mountain of damning evidence. The forensic findings from his car and the crime scene, the 911 calls, the suspiciously muddy clothing he wore the night of his arrest, and testimonies from multiple witnesses. His defense team tried to argue that Michael had no prior history of violence, painting him as a hard-working father who had simply lost control due to financial hardships. They also attempted to pin his actions on his cognitive impairments, citing the head injury he suffered as a child. Additionally, they questioned whether evidence had been mishandled or contaminated. But none of it swayed the jury. On August 28, after just 2 hours and 5 minutes of deliberation, they returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges, kidnapping with intent to commit a felony, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. Then, on September 4th, at 2:45 p.m., the jury made their final decision. In a 12-0 vote, they recommended the death penalty for Michael Lee King. Despite multiple appeals, his conviction and sentence remained intact. Denise's family also sought justice in another way. They filed a lawsuit against Charlotte County authorities for negligence, citing the critical errors that had been made during the investigation. The case was settled out of court for over $1 million. Her husband, Nathan, used the money to buy a modest home for himself and their children, setting aside the rest in a college fund to secure their future. But Denise's legacy didn't end there. On April 24, 2008, the Florida legislature unanimously passed the Denise Amber Lee Act, aimed at improving emergency call operator training. However, participation was optional. Unsatisfied with this, her family continued advocating to make it a nationwide mandatory program. By June of that year, they established the Denise Amber Lee Foundation, dedicated to enhancing emergency response systems and raising awareness about the dire consequences of untrained operators handling life or death situations. Denise's case underscored the importance of swift, coordinated action between law enforcement agencies and emergency services.